was wrong to say I wouldn't change a thing, 'cause in the story of our lives, the best of times through color glass, time rolls on enough to let me move on past, but every little now and then it creeps on back to shade my smile.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be. For all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth, welcome to a brand new season of Vestiges After Dark. And of course, I am your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, coming to you live from the deep woods of Western Georgia on this September 26, 2023. All right, tonight for the first episode of Season 8, you have me. And I'm going to be talking to you about psychic seduction. Okay, might not be what you're thinking it is. And this is going to be a different kind of show, probably different than any other show we've ever done. Okay, I usually prepare for these. I did not tonight because I want this to kind of happen organically. And I think it's going to be an educational experience. I think you're going to learn a lot. It's going to be very philosophical, hardly theological at all, and very metaphysical as well. So you don't want to miss it. Don't go away. Everybody, thank you for joining us tonight for this new season, new episode, new everything. It's going to be really an enjoyable time, I think. I'm really looking forward to spending these 3 hours with you and maybe teaching you a little something about something you didn't know you needed to know, because that's what I usually do best. So that's what we're going to be handling tonight. I am well rested. I just got back from Mexico and Honduras. I went to Chacchoben to see the Mayan ruins, and that is a location where it is pretty much considered by archaeologists and historians on the Mayan culture to be the pinnacle of their civilization. Chacchoben was built when it was at its peak, at its pinnacle, and it was really a fabulous experience. Sometimes when you go to ancient ruins or places that are kind of like places of power, and certainly, let's make no mistake, there were human sacrifices that were conducted, not necessarily in the actual site. They did not, contrary to popular belief, the Mayans did not sacrifice human beings in the temple area, and those are not, as our guide was very very quick to always point out, these are not pyramids. He says, you want to see pyramids, you go to Giza. He says, you want to see Mayan temples, you come here to Mexico. So they don't consider them pyramids in Mexico. They are temples, and they are temples. Although they do kind of serve a very similar function as they do in Giza, because there are some of them that are utilized as tombs for very important figures. But they are temples, and they did not sacrifice human beings at the temples. What they would do, and this is actually very interesting, okay, because, we live in this society where, particularly here in the West, particularly here in the United States, it's very woke, right? Everybody's into the woke stuff, and you can't talk about certain things. And, they're very quick to point out the evils of Christopher Columbus and how, the white man came to the New World and killed everybody with their diseases and with their religion and everything else. And it's funny to, because when you leave America, you leave woke society, and you actually go talk to people that are of this actual culture, where they are more than capable of defending themselves. They don't see it that way. Christopher Columbus is not looked at as a bad guy in Mexico. In a lot of ways, I think they kind of thank him for bringing the culture that they now enjoy as Mexicans, because the Hispanic culture of Mexico they see as a perfect fusion between the indigenous people that were there and the Spaniards. Who came, and that's what they are now. And it's a very Catholic country, and they like that. Okay, they actually are happy that they're Catholic down there. So they don't see this as a bad thing at all that, Christopher Columbus came. But he was very interesting because he asked us questions about 1492, and he's like, he asked, does anyone know what happened in 1492? And of course, all of us know, but nobody wanted to say anything because we're so programmed by American Western woke culture that what can we say that's not going to sound offensive when we talk about 1492? And he was kind of laughing at us. This guy's like, it's the discovery of America. He starts talking about Christopher Columbus, all this stuff. And then we get into, the what people will call the pyramids of Mexico, their temples, and what led to their demise, the demise of the Mayan culture. And it's not what you think. He never even brought up anything about Europeans coming to Mexico to spread disease or conquer them and annex them and do all this.
It was resources, wasn't it? They ran out of resources?
You're on the right direction, but it's even worse than that. So it has to do, believe it or not, with human sacrifice. And what they would do is, you didn't sacrifice humans to the gods at the temples. What you did is you threw them into, which is all over the area, all over the region where the Mayans were, where we were last week. You threw them into a sinkhole. And the sinkholes lead down into the fresh water sources.
Oh, they're poisonous.
And so when there would be droughts, they would interpret that the gods needed more sacrifice. And so they were starting to have hydration problems, not enough water. And so what they would do is they'd throw human beings into the water source, and they would decay and decompose in there, and it would pollute the water source, and it eventually led to the annihilation of their entire civilization. And they did it to themselves. At least that's what these archaeologists were telling us. Okay, I never heard that in America. Well, I'm not sure that gets outside of Mexico. I don't know, but it was very interesting to talk to actual people who are the descendants of the Mayans and are archaeologists, Mexican archaeologists who work there and excavate this location. But I've got some of mine. I don't have all of them because it was just too much to upload. But I've got a lot of my favorite pictures from this trip on my Instagram. If you go to @ExorcistBishop, you can see some of my journey there. And it was wonderful and very interesting to talk to. And it just goes to show you, those of you out there in the United States who think that, you got to be into this woke mindset, it's a political game. And the joke's on you if you buy into it. The rest of the world is not what you think it is. It really isn't. And this was a great example of that, talking to, these wonderful Mexican academics about their own culture and how they see it. And it's nothing like what we've been taught about in the United States. And, how they don't want to say Columbus Day anymore. It's got to be Indigenous Peoples Day and all these other things that they come up with because, they got to feel so good about themselves. And the people themselves, I think, find it ludicrous. Honestly, I really do. At least that was my experience on this trip. So it was very interesting. But anyway, what I meant to say is that sometimes when you go to these places of power, you can feel negative energy, particularly if there is proximity to dark things like human sacrifice and everything. But nothing further could be from the truth. This was a very peaceful location. It was a very relaxing location. There was something very relaxing about it. It was similar in some ways to things that I experienced when I went to Sedona, but not as dizzying. It had much more of a, I don't know how you put it. It was much more of just a peacefulness to it. It's a very peaceful location. And I'm very blessed to have been there and been able to walk. And the Mexican authorities understand people's need for tangible connection to history, and so they don't have a problem with you walking on the I almost said pyramid, walking on the temples or walking up. You can go inside some of the rooms that were administrative places where the Mayans actually conducted their affairs, and you can touch the stones and the only thing that bothered me, and I think I have a picture of it on Instagram. I'm not sure. I did not take a picture of them. The temple area is surrounded by a giant altar that is eroded, but there's a big circular altar there where they would not do human sacrifice, other different types of offerings, and people were sitting on it like it was like a bench, and you know, Tracy and I were looking at each other like, I mean, I almost want to go say something, but none of the archaeologists or other, you know, people there that were excavating, because it's a very active archaeological site, and they're actually clearing it away, and they're bringing in a high-speed train. They're building a high-speed train that we actually passed to try to bring more tourism to the area, which should be interesting in the next few years. So they're getting it ready for a bigger tourist destination than what it is. And nobody was saying anything to them. And I think, you know, Tracy and I were a little bit shocked, and then I thought about it for a minute. It's like, well, you know, they're all really devout Catholics, all of them. I mean, they have no problem talking about their faith. So this is just like yesterday's news to them. They don't see these as sacred places anymore. It's just history. It's Mexican history, and that doesn't need to be venerated or honored in any particular way. It just needs to be preserved. And so they didn't see it as disrespectful, people sitting on the altar, because they don't feel any connection to that Mayan spirituality. They are Catholics today. And, you know, in the United States, we'd never see anything like that. It was very interesting, fascinating thing. And I'm happy I did it. And I wanted to share that experience with you as we get started off here today on Vestiges After Dark. Starting us off, we have Jamie Wolf here with our libation, a brand new liturgical libation. What you have for us?
Good evening. I did not go on a cruise. I cut grass and trimmed and property
and
stuff.
came to visit Heathcliff once.
Came to visit Heathcliff and survived.
He survived it, yeah.
It's touch and go for a little bit. So this is Oak and Eden.
Oh, okay.
Out of Indiana.
Indiana, but bottled in Texas.
Bottled in Texas.
It is a bourbon, but it's not a Kentucky
It is a
bourbon county.
toasted oak bourbon, and the toasted oak wooden spire is actually inside the bottle.
Yeah, let me show that to you. I think you're going to find this interesting.
So the bourbon's finished with the spire in the bottle.
So
my realtor turned me on to this brand
Can you
of
see
bourbon.
that right here? That's the piece of wood.
Yep, toasted
That's in
oak.
there to kind of create flavor. I guess it's easier to see right there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's to create flavor. Very interesting.
So it is a 45%, so it's 90 proof. So
90 proof, okay. Mm-hmm. So nothing to shake a stick at, no pun intended.
Oh my God. Drink. Nothing to shake a spire at.
All right, let's see. Oh my gosh. Well, it definitely smells like bourbon. And it definitely has that sweet toasted notes. So I mean, cheers.
Cheers. Supposed to impart a sweet, fruity note and hints of honey.
Oh my goodness. That is fantastic. That will make an excellent old fashioned.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
Wow.
Let's make some old fashions with that this week.
If you like a good drinking bourbon, y'all, this is good. I really enjoy Buffalo Trace and all their offerings, but this I'm going to have to definitely start grabbing some Oak and Eden.
My goodness, that was fabulous.
That is.
I'm so used to
drinking trouble before the show's over.
I'm so used to drinking Scotch that, you know, when I taste different types of whiskey, it's kind of like shocking now because it's so different. Bourbon is so different. There's no comparison between bourbon and Scotch whiskey. They are two completely different animals altogether.
Yeah, it is.
And
finish is sweet.
It is
sweet
very well.
spicy.
It's corn. I mean, it's corn
Sweet
and
spicy. Good stuff.
Very good. I did get some Okay, yeah, that's a good one. I did get. We were talking about it before the show. I did get a special traveler's edition of the McKellen Oscura. I can't wait to crack that one. Although
It's beautiful, y'all.
it is a collector's item. But I don't believe in collecting whiskey. I believe whiskey is for drinking, and the investors can go to hell. Okay, so that's my philosophy on whiskey.
Go to hell.
I really hate whiskey investors. Actually, I don't mind collectors. I collect. Okay, I don't mind people that collect stuff and then one day they'll crack it open on a special occasion. I have no problem with doing that. What I have a problem with is people that invest in whiskey with no intention to buy it, because they're the ones driving up these prices to these ridiculous amounts. You know, one of the classic whiskeys of all time is the Bowmore, the Black Bowmore. Okay, Black Bowmore. Good luck finding it today. But back when I was in college, you could get Black Bowmore at a regular liquor store for about $150 a bottle, $160. Black Bowmore. Today, you're lucky if you can touch it at auction for $35,000.
Wow.
Okay, it's investors that did that shit, not drinkers. Investors, and so it's like everything else. You know, they have to exploit it.
Right, exploit it. You know, bourbon and whiskey and scotch are made to be
Consumed.
drank and appreciated for the artistry and the spirits that are in the bottle.
It is sacrilege.
And
it's sacrilege
to make it unaffordable for most people
Yeah.
who actually appreciate it is
I mean, at least the only redeeming part of it is that, unlike wine investors, at least whiskey, if it's maintained, if you keep that cork, you know, proper, and you know, you don't expose it to light and you don't shake it up, and you keep it in a nice, you know, good, stable condition, will last indefinitely if it's not opened, as long as you don't open it. Wine, even if you don't open it after a few years, you know, you could still be passing around bottles of wine that are worth a lot, but you can't drink them because wine will not indefinitely hold like whiskey can. Port wine's a little more forgiving. You can kind of hold port for a very long time if you store it well. But, you know, there's like Bordeaux, some really rare Mouton Rothschilds, you know, that go for tens of thousands of dollars that are not drinkable. They're like 1930, 1920, 1910 vintages. You can't drink that. If you try to open that, it's. I mean, maybe you might get a bottle that's drinkable.
I don't know. It'd be pretty skunky by then.
Well,
I doubt the seal's going to be.
Well, that's
intact.
the thing. You got to hope that it was stored well for all that time.
All that time.
And how do you know until you open it? And then it's like once you open it, then your investment's gone. So I don't.
It's kind of like taking those new action figures out of the box. Don't do it.
It's a lot like that. It's a lot like that.
Get on the show.
Joining us from Australia, we have Father Chris Yates. How you doing tonight, Father? Or this morning for you?
Hey, Father Chris.
Oh, I don't have. Oh, goodness gracious, I don't have anybody's microphone on. Look at me.
Okay, well, hi again.
I'm sorry.
Father Chris.
Sorry about that.
Hello.
Go ahead.
That's all right. I was just waiting.
I usually turn it.
Contrary to all the evidence that every viewer has seen before their very eyes, I can actually keep quiet.
Yeah, we don't really have to mute him. We just do it to play with him. You know?
But it's a good job. It's a good job I was muted when you were talking about
woke culture.
Anyone outside the West actually talks about their own culture.
Oh yeah. Do you find that true too? Living in another country, do you find that to be true in your travels?
Yeah. The problem is, well, I as you know, lived in 2 English-speaking countries. And just like, I mean, not quite as extreme as California because nowhere is, but you know, they're just as it's. You know, Thomas Sowell was right when he wrote The Vision of the Anointed. There's this anointed class that just think that
their shit doesn't
they get to control the whole narrative of everything. And you know, so Hollywood celebrities, you know, they love open borders and all the rest of it, because where else are they going to find loads of cheap illegal labor to look after their babies and clean their swimming pools?
I'm telling you.
So yeah, but having traveled the world, other cultures, even amongst Western cultures in Italy and Spain, this just doesn't penetrate. This nonsense just doesn't fly.
No.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, why on earth would a Mexican Catholic worry about the veneration of a pagan temple?
They wouldn't.
I mean, part of their history, and it's valuable, and of course it brings in tourist dollars and all the rest of it, and it's amazing. I'd love to go, by the way. I mean, it's worth it.
Definitely worth doing.
But yeah, it's so bizarre that the West constantly wants to apologize for itself. So that was the only time that I might have jumped in.
Well, hopefully I said everything that needed to be said for you, but
absolutely, good job I didn't.
But I'm telling you right now, I mean, it's amazing just how tainted our understanding of history is when you actually go and talk to the real people that the history that you're learning about is about. When you actually talk to the real people, not some teacher with an agenda in a university, but actual people who are part of the culture.
We're actually, I should say that in Australia we're about to have a referendum in a couple of weeks on whether to put into the constitution. So you would call this an amendment, whether to put into the constitution a permanent panel of Aboriginal people to speak on political matters that affect Aboriginal people, which on the face of it seems like, oh, well, why not? But actually, when you think about it, it's actually introducing racial division into a constitution, which is something which is, I think, is ridiculous. Yeah. But anyway, that's not the point. People can legitimately think yes or no. But what's been very interesting is the people that have been completely not tolerated by the culture, just going back to what you were talking about, are Aboriginal political figures, senators and others, and intellectuals who are opposed to this voice to Parliament. They're Aboriginal and they're opposed to it. And of course, they've been elected. They're actually already representing everybody, including Aboriginal people. And the response from the woke white left has been, because it challenges their paternalistic attitude towards things. They can't cope because they can't call them racists, which is their go-to for people like me.
They need that. Yes, you're right. It's like all of these political things. It's all political. It has no basis in actuality. And we're going to talk a lot about actuality tonight. Actually, it's really going to be. This is a good lead-in, even though I'm not going to be political at all tonight, other than what I just said. Tonight's show is all about correct perception. Okay, so it's going to be, I think, a bit of a brain trip for some of you. It's going to be challenging for some of you. I think some of you are going to love it. Some of you are going to hate it. Some of you are going to think that you need to disagree with it. And I'm going to try to challenge you right now to not fall into that trap. I'm not going to present tonight's show with something that is to be agreed with or disagreed with. It is something to be considered as a new way of understanding what we take for granted as reality. That's what we're going to be talking a lot about tonight. But before we even get to that, we have questions from the ether. And joining us from Tennessee is Brandon Milam tonight. How are you tonight, Brandon?
Brandon!
I'm doing pretty good. You didn't need to mute me either. You said pretty much all I wanted to say.
Great. Didn't mean to. Usually I take your mute off during the opening music, but for some reason, I guess I'm a little out of practice. I didn't do it this time. So when I hit, there's actually two buttons. Yeah, I didn't mean to do it, but go. Yeah. So what do we got tonight, Brandon?
So I will just say, do not get me started on history being taught in schools.
Okay.
Just don't get me started on that.
History's not taught in schools.
It's not taught in schools.
It's not. Right. Agendas are taught in schools. Agendas. They only teach agendas. They call it history, but it's really just agenda.
Yes. Okay, so the first question comes from me. Can you elaborate a bit more on the ancient Judaism view on the acknowledgement of other deities? I was taught growing up that the commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me, meant not turning anything into an idol, like your phone or a car or whatever.
Okay, that's a good question. Actually, again, another good lead-in to tonight's show. So, let's talk about thou shalt have no other gods above me. It sounds, it's not as though God is saying, there is no God but me. It's saying don't have any above me. And of course it is taught, as you said, even in Catholicism, it is taught as this is idols. Don't put other things or make other things more important than God, which is absolutely correct. And so you weren't taught incorrectly. I wouldn't say you were taught incorrectly. I would say you were taught incompletely, which is pretty typical in religion today. The reality is, the ancient Israelites were henotheistic. Okay, they believed that there was a supreme deity among countless others, but there was a real one, a higher one, and not higher in the sense of like Zeus or Jupiter, but higher in a sense that was transcendent. And that is why this was a god that, when you had all these pagan temples with a pillar that had the likeness of the deity that the temple was built for on that pedestal, the Jewish people had a pedestal that was empty because you couldn't contain the image of something that had no image. And then there was a god that was recognized even in pagan times, and there's like some interesting stories that more than we can get into tonight. That was that was a temple that had an empty pedestal, was the unknown god, and some have assumed that this was the God of the Israelites. So in a sense, when the ancient Israelites were writing down what became the scriptures, the Old Testament, they would have been writing this down with the understanding that, there's lots of gods out there, but there's only one that is worthy of worship, and that's ours. And so they would have not had a problem with you thinking that, well, maybe Zeus is real, or maybe, all these other pagan deities are real, but the only one that matters is Yahweh. Okay. Now, Christianity takes it a bit step further, as it should, because it is sort of the evolution, right, of revelation. And so the Christian understanding of this is that while the ancient Israelites would have believed that there were other deities, and that their God was the actual one to worship, that was the one that was above them all, it would be revealed through the 2,000, 3,000 years of revelation leading up to Jesus Christ and to the Christian religion, that we would eventually come to the understanding through these revelations that there really was never any other God but the God. All of these other things were not real gods at all. Now, I'm going to throw a caveat in that, okay? What pagans worship are not other gods, even though they think they are. And that is where we can sort of see where the church is coming from with this understanding, and understanding how the ancient Israelites would have known about this prior to having all the revelations that Christians enjoy today, and how there would be a difference in understanding because of this. But we can take it one step further and say that the pagans do worship a multitude of gods, and they are real in the sense that what they are doing is personifying the actions of God. So instead of worshiping the God who loves you, they worship love as a personified image in the form of Venus or Aphrodite. Yeah. And love is an expression of God's power. It isn't a God. It's not what you don't worship the actions of God. You worship the God who creates those actions, who performs those actions, who interacts with you through those actions. So in a sense, pagans are almost there, but they just haven't made the final leap, which actually is what makes Hinduism a fascinating religion, because it is seen as polytheistic in the same way that neo-paganism is seen as polytheistic, but it's really not a polytheistic religion. In a lot of ways, when you actually study Hindu theology, you find that it is intrinsically monotheistic. There is only really one God, and that is Brahman. Brahman has an expression of a trinity in the same sort of way that you could compare the on sof of Judaism to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Okay, is like sort of like on sof is like the higher unknowable reality of God, which is sort of that part of the Father that is just untouchable to us, but he emanates. That unsoft emanates down to us through Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that's the revelation of the unknowable God. Okay. And Hinduism has this too. So you have Brahman, which is the sort of the highest reality. And then that emanation comes down to us through Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Okay. And that's their trinity. And then we are an expression made in the image of God, just like Christians believe. And Hinduism is called Atman, which is sort of the embodiment of Brahman in the human being. It's very consistent and very compatible, I would say, with the metaphysics of Christian theology, even though it's not seen as such. But I highly recommend people to study Hinduism to kind of bridge that gap, because it's not really polytheistic in the way that the Romans and Greeks were. And the Romans and Greeks really weren't too far off. What they were doing is they were looking at the world around them and they were seeing the actions of God. So God's wrath would not be coming from one deity. It would be its own deity. So Mars, right, would be the god of war, god of wrath. Instead of seeing it, it was all coming from the same divine source.
So it's the expressions
they worship. So in a sense, that is idolatry, which is why idolatry and polytheism kind of get lumped in there together as sort of the same problem, and that's because it is the same problem. But today we don't, Westerners don't typically, unless they are neo-pagans, they don't typically believe in gods like Mars or Venus, whatever. But they do create new idols: money, power, greed, status. All of this is another replacement for God. And it's the same thing. It's taking the gifts that God gives us, because, if you live a good life, if you're financially comfortable and you're blessed with food on your table and a good job and stability, that's a blessing from God. But you shouldn't worship those things. That's God's gift to you. The gift isn't what's divine. It's the individual who gives you the gift, which is God. And if we don't recognize that, if we just focus on the gift, then we miss the point, which is what paganism is doing, what polytheism is doing. It's missing the point. It's focusing in on the individual aspects, personifying them into some kind of division, when in reality, it's all coming from the same divine source. And that divine source actually wants to know us, wants to interact with us, and wants to use these expressions as a means to reach us. So
it's also why the contemporary world in the West thinks that we're progressing away from Christianity into this sort of scientism and actually extreme materialism.
Yes,
but really all they're doing is repeating paganism. Which is why we have this, they don't say Gaia, but we really have Gaia worship going on, where they're worshiping creation or foregrounding creation as more important than we are, for example, as men and women. And so, this is actually a regression, not progression.
It is.
And actually what we live in is, I think I've said this before, is fallen nature. It's not Eden. It's fallen nature. So yes, God provides these things for us, and it's why, as you said, that the ancient Israelites moved from this pantheism, well, not pantheism, panentheism. I can't remember the technical correct term for it, but where there's a sense, when there's a lightning storm, well, that there's a God in that, and what have you. They move beyond this, because actually the fundamental truth is that nature is not perfect, cannot be God, because it's been denatured.
Yes.
And human beings too have been denatured, but God has set about, going back to the ancient Israelites, God has now set out a plan to say, this is how you can have your nature restored, how you can become more like you're supposed to be.
Yes.
Which is to be hope.
Well, I mean, it's a perfect question, because this is really going to be a lot of tonight's topic. And you think, what does that
I
have to
can
do with
see the
psychic?
connections already.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Open up those synapses.
And a lot of you who have listened to me talk for a long time, if you've been listening to the show for a while, or if you're one of my students or something, then you probably can already see the beginning of where we're going with this. So, but it's going to be an interesting journey. So, does that answer? Since that's your question, Brandon, I'll ask you: does that answer it to your satisfaction, or do you have a follow-up question to that?
No, you probably answered it a whole lot better than anyone around here could.
Oh well, that's good. Although I'm not sure that says much.
Give you the answer plus some.
Backhanded compliment.
Yeah, I'm not sure that means much. It's like it wouldn't be too hard to do from what you tell me, Brandon.
No. All right, so the next question comes from Valerie.
Okay.
We've touched on many topics, but I don't ever recall fairies. Are they considered good or evil?
Okay, this is Val's question: good or evil? All right,
the fae?
fairy, the fae, yeah.
Fae? Either one.
It's just like people. Okay, so when you're dealing with elementals, fae are a category of spirit, a non-corporeal being that we refer to as an elemental in my system. Although I'd say that there are other systems that use that same terminology. And elementals are essentially individual beings, just like we are, only they are non-corporeal. Okay, where we're corporeal beings, like, there's different species of corporeal being. You have human beings, you have cats, dogs, everything else. But we're all physical. We all share that physicality. There are incorporeal creatures that are part of the creation, that are different species and have their own individual interactions with the world and different levels of sophistication with intellect and everything else, just like the animal kingdom that we know through tangible experience and physicality. Same thing. And so there can be, in the higher, remember, good and evil is, you need intellect for good and evil. Okay. I wouldn't say a lion is good or evil. I wouldn't even say Heathcliff is good or evil. Any goodness he knows is just through domestication and his interaction with me, and his family.
He has his moments, Bishop.
Well,
he has his moments.
Well, he has his instincts, but the reality is he doesn't make decisions to be a good person or a bad person, or a good cat or a bad cat. There is, I guess, behavioral norms that we might evaluate as human beings and say, well, that was a terrible cat. That cat was, doing all, he was shitting on the bed. He was doing all this stuff. That was a terrible cat. And then you could have a cat that's like, most loving thing, always on your lap, always there for you when you're sick. He's sitting with you. And you might say that's a good cat. Whether or not he's making good or bad decisions, I think is a stretch. I don't think he's making good or bad decisions like a human being makes good or bad decisions. But
can't make moral decisions.
Moral decisions.
He could make a bad decision to put his paw inside hot fat, but he can't make a morally bad decision.
But could he make an evil decision? Yeah. If he goes and he hurts someone, is that an evil decision? I think that's just nature, right? And then it gets back into human beings. How much of our bad behavior is instinctual because we're primates? I think a lot of it, actually. I think a lot of it is the only difference is that we have the ability to transcend our instinct, where lower animals do not. Well, the same is kind of true with the incorporeal. Okay, there are very sophisticated ones that are operating on an intellectual, it's not really intellect because there's no brain in the same way, but there's intelligence there that is very sophisticated, and there can be decision making that can be both good or bad, or good and evil, how you want to look at it. From our standard, from the human standard, again, even good and evil is a moral judgment, right? And Father Chris just said it. I mean, trying to make an assessment as to whether or not something's good or evil is always going to come back to a standard. And something has to decide what that standard is. For us, it might be the Bible, it might be, the Levitical law of Moses. I mean, it could be all sorts of different things that you use to judge what's good or evil. But what might be good to one culture might be evil to another. I think I've talked on this show before with cultural pluralism and how there was this tribe in South America, I think it was, and I think it was the Amazon, where if twins were born, it was a bad omen. It's a sign that they're going to bring death to the tribe. And so the only way the only holy way for them in their spirituality to rectify this was to take the newborn twins out to the woods and leave them to the elements to die. And by giving them back to nature, then they restore the imbalance that's created by the omen. Now, we as Westerners look at this and say, this is ridiculous. This is murder. This is evil, but to them, that's the only moral thing to do. So morality is always going to have to come back to some kind of standard in the Western world, whether you are Christian or not, whether you believe in the Judeo-Christian worldview or not. I can tell you right now, your understanding of good and evil is completely orchestrated and measured according to biblical standard. Yep. It is, whether you like it or not. It is.
I was just going to say though, because a lot of people, who are post-Christian, they reach this point where they go, well, Dawkins makes this argument. How can you believe in this God that, says go and destroy the Amalekites and blah, blah, blah? Because if you extend out that principle of morality being to some extent subjective, I think there are ultimately objective morals, but they're actually very few. But if you extend it out, then actually... Here's the question: can God be immoral? And of course, our answer would have to be absolutely not. Of course, he can't be immoral because God is the author of morality, and therefore, in other words, we can't judge him by our standard of morality because it's his standard. Right. But you can see why this causes concern and confusion and doubt amongst people who they think how can a just God allow this to take place, or how can a just God be defended in the face of what we see as moral outrage? Yeah,
and of course that has its own theological answers that must be considered in the grand scheme of the question, and that is, of course, part of it is that we're not understanding God correctly. We're not capable, for one.
And we can't. Yeah.
And we can't.
Well outside our little brain box.
And the Old Testament is pre-revelation. Okay, it's just it's the dawning, it's the prophetic message that leads to the actual revelation of God. So obviously the ancient Israelite understanding of God is not going to get it right. They're going to see God through the lens of what's going on in their world, which was, of course, going to be flavored by their experience and their culture, which didn't have the benefit of Christian revelation yet. So that explains a lot of it too. I'm not so sure God is telling anyone to go kill anyone. If you're a literalist and you think that the Bible is like the Quran, where it's an actual dictation, then I could see how that's very problematic. But that's not what Christians believe. That's not what Jews believe either, by the way. We don't believe that the Bible is a dictation. It is an inspired work. It is a faith account. It is the author's experience with God shared in usually metaphorical or allegorical ways. That's essentially what the Bible is. If you want literalism, you're going to need to talk to the Muslims, because they're the ones that believe the Quran is the actual dictation. Okay, that's a whole different ball game. And so if the Quran says something that seems like that wouldn't be God talking, well, that is problematic, because they think it is actually. They don't think it's an interpretation. It's not a translation. It's not a faith account. It's not an experience. It's Muhammad dictated it through the angel Gabriel.
Part of their studies is they have to memorize the Quran in Arabic.
Yeah. Yeah, and Arabic's the only Quran, by the way.
Right.
If you're reading Quran in English, that's not the Quran. It's just
correct.
A translation. The only Quran that can ever be is the actual Arabic words, because they believe it's what God actually said. Christians and Jews do not say that about their scriptures. Muslims do. So we can't be held accountable to that. If you were taught in some kind of crazy, radical, Brandon Milam world, how you have all these people teaching these really weird things about the Bible out where you grew up.
It's not just where he's at.
I know. I'm
not too far
razzing him because he's always talking about
it. But it is mainly in America.
It is mainly in America. It is. Even Protestantism in Europe is not like this. It is not like this.
Nothing like it.
Yeah. That is true. That is true. And so even American Protestants have deviated so much from their Protestant origins.
And then one of your Americans came here to the Central Coast, which is about a 40-minute drive from where I live, and started Seventh-day Adventism.
Okay. All right.
The SDAs were from here, but in fact, it was an American that came over and did it.
It reminds me of that guy that went out to, what's that island called? Farther off of India. India kind of leaves them alone.
Sri Lanka or Goa?
No, not Sri Lanka. No, it's a remote island. No, it's an island off the coast of India that is completely isolated from the world. It's just a tribe that lives there, and they'll kill you if you go near them.
Yeah, I do know
we
it.
talked about this.
And there was a Christian guy that was he was going to be the one to lead them to Christ.
Yeah, that didn't work out so
and
well.
And they killed him.
No, bro, we're gonna kill you.
Didn't work out too well.
Yeah.
But the Indian government owns the island as part of the country, but they leave them alone. It's kind of a special jurisdiction, I guess you could say.
They are the fuck around and find out tribe.
They are.
Yes.
They are, and that's what happens when you get a little too high and mighty with your evangelical ideologies. So anyway, So the Fae, good and evil. Most elementals are instinctual, and instinct is neither good or evil. It just is. Okay, and but understand.
My Irish grandmother very much believed in them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And no, there's no question.
I have a fairy altar on my property.
There's no question that these things exist. Okay. I mean, I'm sure that there's people that don't believe in them, but I mean, unless you're doing the kind of work that I do, where you would interact with them, you're never going to need to believe in them. It's not really necessary.
Spirits.
It's a nature spirit, is what it is. But yes, I mean, they are mostly instinctual, which makes them mostly neutral. Okay, but the ones that can operate on a higher intellectual level, that can make decisions, can, just like people, make good or bad decisions. Okay, and
like
that's kind of like the jinn. Yeah. But again, not all jinn are even sophisticated; just most of them are. But yeah, I mean, evil is instinct is not evil. However, that being said, I guess I should add this in as a caveat. An instinct is a product of nature, and nature is fallen, as Father Chris pointed out. So therefore, instinctual nature is going to be flawed. There's going to be violence in instinct, which is why you have such violence I mean, look, this is a cold, cruel universe. It is out to destroy everything here. This little bubble floating through the blackness of space is really kind of miraculous. How you cannot believe in God is kind of beyond me, just on that basis alone, because it shouldn't even be here. And we've never found anything quite like it. I mean, there's like some planets out there that might be Earth-like, but we don't really know how developed they are, or if they're even capable of sustaining life like this one is. As far as we know, this is the only place in the universe that's like this, and the rest of the universe is completely inhospitable to all life. So I think that's kind of fascinating in a way, but that's part of the fallen nature, is that it is a place of death now, and so the entire universe is toxic to anything that lives, which is. We could get into that later on tonight, so I'll stop there for this one. But let's get on to the next one, Brandon.
So the final question comes from Kim. I was wondering if one's natal chart is altered or void if you're put up for adoption.
Okay, so natal charts and astrology.
Actually,
astrology is based upon the orientation of the planets, okay, at the time you were born. It has no impact at all on anything that takes place after you come out of the womb. Okay, so whatever the configuration is of the planets at that time is what creates the natal chart.
But and it may not be easy for an adopted person to get accurate information.
There you go.
That's where it messes up.
Where it gets messed up. Yeah. So if you're adopted and you're looking at your natal chart and you're like, this doesn't seem right, it's probably because you might have inaccurate information as to your actual birth time. Birth time is a big issue, even with people that do know their parents. Okay. Fortunately, in the last 40 years or 50, probably about 60 years, actually, they got really good about putting the birth time, the exact birth time, on the birth certificate. So if you can get your birth certificate, at least if you were born the last 60 years or so, you should be able to get your exact birth time, assuming the doctor wrote it down correctly. If your parents don't remember, which is possible. But because I'll be honest, I couldn't tell you Levi's birth time. I used to be able to know, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I'd have to look. But it's on the birth certificate. Prior to that, prior to 60 years, then you might not have even had any information on there other than your name. So it can be really tough to do a chart on someone that's older than 60 because of that. And if you were adopted and some of that information's just being guessed, you might know the birthday, but you might not know the time. And if you don't have the time, you're going to be missing a big chunk of the natal chart, and it will be inaccurate. And you might be like, well, this is all bullshit. When in fact, it's just because you have the wrong time. So no, being adopted doesn't change the chart other than what Jamie said, is that it's possible that the information could be wrong, but it's only based upon the orientation of the stars at the time you come out of the womb. So when you're born, when you come out and take your first breath, whatever the stars are doing at that moment, that's your natal chart, and nothing that you do changes it. That chart is forever yours. Now, is it predestination? No. And I've told my students this before. Astrology is not fatalism. It doesn't tell you that this is all you got and you can't do anything else with it. What it does is it shows you your potentials. It shows you what potentials you have to work with, be it that you take them dynamically or statically, be it that you go with them and you use them in a beneficial way, or they become barriers to your success. It's all up to you and how you work with them. But if you have a difficult chart because you've got a lot of difficult energy in there, let's say, and you do nothing to try to improve the situation, then you might find that you do have a difficult life as the result of it. Not because the stars are making you have a difficult life, but just simply that the archetypal pattern under which you were generated is a challenging one to work with. I personally have what is known in astrology in my natal chart as a grand cross. It's one of the worst configurations to have. And I live with the challenges of that every day, but look at what I do with it. Okay. So what's a grand cross typically? Well, you're going to have a lot of oppositions. Okay. You're going to have clumps of planets in different parts of the chart, all vying for power, and none of them are going to be working together. That's usually a person who cannot get their act together, which
Sounds
I guess
like our government.
It might have a grand cross. I've never looked at the chart of the United States of America. Yes, believe it or not, even countries have charts.
Yep.
When they're founded, that's their natal chart. When businesses are founded, that's their natal chart. So you can do it with businesses, countries, anything really. But with people,
well, when you're founded by a bunch of traitors, I mean, you can pretty much guarantee it's going to go wrong.
But they were good traders, though. You
They had a good run for a little while.
They were smart ones.
Yeah, they had a good one for a
better than what we got running the country today. That's for sure.
Yes.
But anyway, so the natal chart is, it doesn't predetermine what you do with your life. It just shows you, if you do nothing, what your life is most likely going to be. So your job is to look at the energy in your natal chart and know how to best utilize it. That's what astrology really should teach people. And we can maybe do a show on astrology one day if somebody's interested in it. Maybe even find an astrologer. We tried to get an astrologer on. She was difficult to reach.
I'm going to reach out again.
Yeah.
Yep.
It would be fun because I think there's a lot of value there, and it's not the horoscope in the newspaper. It's a whole lot more than that. My eyes have been opening since class started on the astrology. And it's not what you thought, is it?
It's a lot more involved than I thought.
Yeah. No, it's a very
it's a lot more than the daily newspaper horoscopes.
It is. I would say out of
Your sun sign.
The sun sign, right? Out of all of the things in the esoteric arts and sciences, I'd say that the most scientific of all of them is astrology. It's very mathematical.
Right.
And once you understand what it's actually doing, then you realize that it's not what you were taught to believe it is. The stars aren't making you do anything. Okay. It's just the option, the operations of synchronicity. Another way to measure it. That's all it is. So no, the answer to the question is being adopted has no bearing on the natal chart, other than the fact that you might not know what your actual natal chart looks like because you don't have correct information. And that should do it. Is there any other question about that you can think of, Brandon?
No, that was all the questions I could find, and shockingly, I don't have any right now.
No, that's fine. Okay.
That was good questions.
It was good questions, and they definitely lead into tonight's topic, which I have a few minutes here to talk about before we get started in the next hour, and that is going to be psychic seduction. So let me, preface this with some, disclaimers, okay? if you're easily offended because you're into a lot of metaphysical stuff, like you're into mediumship and you're into psychic ability and you're into all that stuff, and we definitely have a lot of people on this show as guests that fall into this category. Okay, I am not. What I'm about to share with you is on this next hour is not going to be an insult to them. Okay, it's not going to be an insult to you if you are in that camp. Okay, I think you know me well enough by now to say that I do see value and I respect the various disciplines that people adopt, even if they are contrary to the traditionalism of the Christian religion or something else where, it might not be looked at as fondly. I'm not like that. I'm not that kind of bishop. I'm not that kind of Christian. And I'm not that kind of person. Even if I weren't a Christian, I'm not that way. That's just not the way that I am. I respect people's worldviews. I respect different disciplines. I like to learn as much as I can about everything, and I'm not afraid of knowledge. And so, I understand that that's where I'm coming from. But there are levels of truth, okay? Not all truth is to be measured equally, okay? And there's a difference between what is true and what is actual. Those are two different things, despite popular belief, and we use them as synonyms. They're not synonyms. Just like how people use spirit and soul as synonyms. They're not synonyms. They're two completely different realities. Okay? What is true is going to be very different than what is actual. Okay? Kind of like how in my class, when I talk about certain things like this, I refer to conventional truth and absolute truth. Absolute truth is different than conventional truth. Sometimes absolute truth will disagree or contradict conventional truth. Sometimes multiple conventional truths.
It's like folk tales. It's like folk tales. The boy that cried wolf is not an actual event, but it's a true story.
It's a true story. Yes, it is. That's a great example and definitely gives, I think, the starting foundation to how we're going to approach this subject tonight. And the reason... Thank you for that, by the way, Father. That was a good input. I want to be clear that in order to understand the topic on psychic seduction, we're going to have to get very philosophical at one point this evening. Maybe not at the beginning, because I expect in the beginning I'm going to give you 4 stories from my life. Some of them you might already know parts of, but I've never shared all of them. I think all of them will be interesting for you. I'm going to give you 4 paranormal, metaphysical, supernatural experiences from my life that happened. And 2 of them are going to be ones that were psychic seductions. And 2 of them were going to be ones that actually became actually true or revealed themselves to be actually true, absolute true. Okay. And I'm going to show you the difference, and I'm going to teach you, hopefully by the end of this the end of the show, it is kind of a class. At the end of the show, I'm going to teach you how to hopefully discern the difference for yourself, or at least get you started on discerning the difference for yourself, because most people out there, unfortunately, do not give the thought or attention necessary to even know that they can be psychically seduced. And what do I mean by psychic seduction? Well, let me leave you with this before we go to break. Psychic seduction is when you get a psychic impression, either from us going to a psychic, going to a medium, being told something, getting a psychic flash yourself, or coming into contact with some kind of spiritual event, a vision, whatever, apparition, something tells you something, an EVP that you collect during an investigation, whatever. Okay, it could be any of these things, or none of them. It could be something else entirely. But you get some information psychically, and then it's actually false. And I'm going to challenge you to understand this is not because it's the devil. It's not because Satan is there tricking you and these were demons tricking you. That's not it at all. It's a lot more simple than that. Okay? But most of the time, psychic information is a bunch of bullshit. We'll be right back.
One more time and one more night without your hands, without me in your arms. Looking back, I want I promise I won't jealous. You don't deserve it all. I'm gonna be bloody, 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 bloody. Let's talk about. Let's talk about. Let's talk about. Talk about love. Let's talk about. La 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 la.
Hey desire, burning like a fire. What you gonna do when it crumbles down? Won't you get higher, down to the wire? Will you let it burn till we almost drown? Higher, goodbye, honey, where do we lie? Where you're headed, am I going there too? I don't wanna ask why, wanna give this a try with you. And if you wanna go, I'll follow. I won't let you go alone. 'Cause it's a big pill to swallow, but you won't do it on your own. And if you wanna go, I'll follow. I won't let you go alone. I don't care what happens now, where we go, how far and how. If you wanna go, I'll follow. I won't let you go. I won't let you go. I won't let you go. And if you wanna go, I'll follow. I won't let you go alone. 'Cause it's a big pill to swallow, but you won't do it on your own. And if you wanna go, I'll follow. I won't let you go alone. I don't care what happens now, when we go, how far and how. If you wanna go, I'll follow. Have you made your mind yet? Have you got your heart set? I don't wanna jump half-hearted. Gotta get your feet wet, gotta give what you get. I don't wanna finish where we started. Like the river flowing, tell me where we're going. Take me to a place that's brand new. With every second growing, time feels like it's slowing with you. And if you wanna go, I'll follow. I won't let you go alone. 'Cause it's a big pill to swallow, but you won't do it on your own. If you wanna go, I'll follow. I won't let you go alone. I don't care what happens now, when we go, how far and how. If you wanna go, I'll follow.
Welcome back, everybody, to the second part of Vestiges After Dark. We have started Season 8 here in good fashion, I believe, and I think you'll find tonight's topic equally as interesting. When I come back here from this break, we're going to dive right into 4 experiences that I had in life that were of the paranormal, metaphysical nature, spiritual experiences, if you will. And I'm going to talk about how 2 of them actually led to a greater truth, and 2 of them were complete, well, I wouldn't say lies, but they weren't true, okay? You don't want to miss it. Don't go away. So here's what we're going to really, let's just get started, I think, with, I usually write, like I said, I usually write things down so I don't lose track or can give a more cohesive sort of lecture. But I didn't want this show to be that. I wanted this to be a more organic show, like most of our shows. And I wanted it to just sort of go where it led me. So we're going to just get started off with these experiences, and then I'll kind of talk about the nature of them and how they differ and how they're similar. And hopefully, we can use this as fuel to lead into the conclusion and then get into some of the metaphysics and philosophy that lead us to why this is what it is. And when before the break, I said most psychic ability is bullshit. And it is, but not for the reasons you think. It's not for like the reasons that atheists might say it is, or people that just are complete skeptics. It's not for those reasons. It's, I believe, the phenomena, I should say, that people that have these kinds of interactions encounter, these are real experiences. The problem is we have to understand how to define real. And we don't define real very well in this society. We're not very good at that at all, honestly. So we're going to talk about what is real, okay, and how should we define it. We're going to shift our definition a little bit. Like I said, I'm not here to give you a presentation that you can agree or disagree with. I'm here to give you a new way to look at some old ideas, okay, and that's all we're doing here tonight. Hopefully that's all I do with this show. The show's not supposed to influence people. It's supposed to educate them, to give them more information to work with so that they can form more educated opinions, I guess you could say, or maybe avoid opinions altogether and just realize that the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Anyway, let's talk about my experiences. Okay, so the first one, I'm not going to tell you which ones came true and which ones didn't until the end. All right, so the first one I'm going to give you is one of my earliest ones. This is one of the first supernatural experiences I ever had. Okay, I was about maybe 4 years old, and 4 years old, and this would have been like 1977, 76, 77. Okay, and back in the 70s, kids could be kids. Even at 4 years old, there was no problem with me running off into the woods and getting lost in there and coming back, before dinner time. It was just what I did. That was the freedom I enjoyed back then, even as young as 4. I think that that's really a wonderful thing, actually, that we should keep that as something that we should maybe bring back into our society and get away from this obsession with safety. But that's another topic for another day. So I would go off into the woods all the time as a child at this age. And literally, I'd wake up, have my breakfast, and go off, and I wouldn't come back until literally the sun was going down. Sometimes I think I came back after the sun went down. It was the way that I lived back then. And there was something kind of spiritual, I guess you could say, about the place that I grew up. There was something kind of spiritual about that land, that property. And Brandon, I'm going to mute your microphone. I'm getting feedback from your mic. I'm just going to mute you for a second here. And
I've just sent him a tip on how to fix that.
Okay, I'm going to mute it. Let him fix it, and then I'll bring you back when. I'll bring you back once we've got this resolved because I'm getting a lot of feedback. Okay, so anyway, thank you for sending that over, Father. So anyway, I was out there every day doing this, and one day I went out there and I heard a voice. Okay, and I thought it was somebody, I thought it was a person. Turns out later on that it wasn't, but I heard a voice, and it just called my name. And I said, yes. And it just said Brian. And I said, yes. And I couldn't see anybody. So I said, where are you? And nothing came of that. And then on another occasion, maybe several days or several weeks later, I was up there and it happened again. But this time it would progress each time. It would get a little more, it would go from just my name to now, we've been watching you, and then I would say, well, who are you? Where are you? And then there would be nothing. And then as time went on, it would, again, more would be said or revealed each time. And this particular time, and this could have been months after this whole thing started. I don't really remember. I was young. It said to me, Brian, we feel it's really important for you to know that God is love. Now, understand, I was not raised in a very religious childhood. We never went to church except on rare occasion. I wasn't even in school yet at this point. So I didn't really have biblical information. This would not have been something I would have heard at home. All right. It would have been like people were reading the Bible and said, oh, God is love, No, there wasn't any real conversation about that very much. My mother would sometimes talk about the life. We would go to my French Canadian great aunt's house, and there she'd have these crucifixes all over the place. It looked more like a church than a domicile. And I'd ask about what on earth is that? Because she had these Italian crucifixes, these giant, very graphic, crucifix with the blood and gore, very detailed. Yeah. And of course, as a 3-4-year-old looking at this, that's kind of a bizarre thing to see. Okay, and my mom would tell me sort of like the Passion story. But there was not really much of anything in detail about that. So there was no way I would have known this as a spiritual truism. So it couldn't have been like my imagination or anything. And so I didn't know what to say to that. And it said, yeah, God is love. We want you to know this. And we feel it's very important that your grandmother know this too. So go back and tell your grandmother right now. So I said, okay. You're 4 years old. You don't question this kind of stuff. You're just going to do it. Right. And so I'm running down that hill, running all the way back to the house. I mean, it's several acres, made it back inside. And I'm like, looking for my grandmother. Where are you? Where are you? And she's like, right here. What's wrong? I said, oh, I need you to know that God is love. And she's like, I think she was kind of taken aback by that.
Say her eyes get huge.
Yeah, and she's like, yes, he is, and kind of agreeing with me and not really understanding where this is coming from, and I think she even asked, what made you, come and find me to tell me this, and I think I said you needed to know. I think I just reiterated what these guys in the woods told me. which I still could not see. They did not show me themselves at this point in time. So at this point, I started getting real curious about this, and I would start going out to that part of the woods because it always happened in the same place. Interestingly enough, it wasn't just all over the woods; it was always the same location. And I went back out there and I started asking. I said, "Hey, are you here?" And I think I might have been 5 by this point now because this had been going on for months. And I was probably well into 5 years old by this point. Had already started kindergarten, and And I remember saying, are you here? I'm looking for you. And they would say, yes, we're here. And I said, I said, so where are you? I was always very curious to see where they were because what was confusing about this is the sound would be coming from all around you. So you really couldn't say it was like over there in those bushes or over there behind that tree. It wasn't behind you. It wasn't in front of you. It was all around you. It was a very, have you ever been inside a building that has like perfect acoustics, but it's a small room? Right. How like when you hear any sound,
you
it feels,
tell where it's coming
you can't.
From. Right.
It just feels like that's what this was like. But it was outside in the woods, in the forest. So it should not have had that kind of effect. Anyway, I then went on and asked. I said, "I'd like to know more about who you are." And it said, "Well, we want you to go back and tell your grandmother that God is love again. Go back and tell her." And I said, "Okay." So I running down the hill, back in the house, screaming for her, "Where are you? Where are you? God is love." And it's like this again, right? And I think she found it endearing and whatnot. And so, that was it. Weeks went by, went back into the woods. And this time I asked, "Are you here?" And they said, "Yes, we're here." And I said, "Where are you? I really want to see you." And they said, "Not yet. But this time we have something that we need you to do for us." And I said, "What?" And they said, "Your grandmother has a camera. Does she not?" I said, "Yes. And it always has film in it." And I said, "Yes, it does." They said, "We want you to ask her to we want you to go and ask her if you can use her camera to take a picture of her." And I said, "Okay, I can do that." And so I did. I went back down the hill, running back in. I said, "Where's my grandmother? Where are you?" "Here I am." I said, "I need to use your camera. I need to take a picture of you." And she's like, "Okay." And she didn't really care because they were going out that night. So she was already kind of dressed up. And so she was like, "Okay, yeah. I mean, actually, I think she was saying that it was like actually a really good thing because she felt that she looked nice that night. And so she got the camera out and let me take a picture of her in front of the television. Now, it was very important to understand that it was in front of the television while the television was off because everybody was leaving the house. All right. They were getting ready to shut down the house and lock up to go out for the night. And so there was nobody watching TV at this point, and everything would have been off. Okay. And so I took the picture and gave her back the camera. And I went several days later. Now, this was back in the days where, you kept a roll in your camera and you didn't do anything with the pictures until you reached the end of the roll, right. And then you go and develop it, right? Because you don't want to, I don't even think it was 35. I think it was like just one of those cartridge cameras.
Oh my
and
goodness.
You probably had like 25 exposures or whatever. And you would just keep them because you don't want to waste the extra exposures. And then once you reach the end of the roll, you would go and get it developed. So you sometimes would have old pictures on there if you went a long time without taking pictures. It wasn't like today with instant gratification on a, cell phone. So I went up into the woods several weeks later. I don't think there was much that went on. And I asked, and, "Are you here?" And they said, "Yes, we are." And and they said, "Did you take the picture of your grandmother?" I said, "Yes, I did." And they said, "Tell her that she needs to develop the role." And so I run back down and I said, we need to go and bring that picture I took a few weeks ago. We need to go and develop it. And she's like, I think she was like objecting to it because there was still like 10 pictures left on there. And I said, it doesn't matter. You have to develop this. We need to go now. Okay. And of course, even back then, you brought it to like the pharmacy or something.
There's a whole section of your audience that don't know anything you're talking about.
I bet.
Yeah, you have to go to like Wolf Camera or the Kodak.
I guess I need to explain this. So basically, when you have a film,
we understand.
When you have a film camera, you didn't develop it yourself typically, unless you had a dark room, which most people didn't. If you were into photography, you might have, but most people didn't do that. They would take the pictures to the pharmacy or and there would be like a place where you could get your photos developed, and you would put them into an envelope. They'd send them off somewhere, and you get them back in like 3 or 4 days later.
Right.
Then they started getting into the instant photo where you could get like the pictures in 1 hour. It was like 1 hour photos places.
Yes. Yeah.
Remember those?
Oh, God, yeah.
But that was like after this time. This is the 70s. We didn't have that.
And they put little stickers on it. Like if you had an overexposed thing, they'd put a little sticker on it that said, don't overexpose your photos.
Yeah, they would. They would.
Tips.
Yeah, they would give you tips because they were like you were wasting money developing pictures that weren't any good. Anyway, they went ahead and we did this, and a few days later got it back. Now, she liked slides. Now, this is another thing that the audience might know not know about. Slide projectors were a thing. If you wanted to share your family photos with everybody, you didn't put them on paper.
The person in the family with a slide projector was the shit. I mean, they're like, oh, okay.
So you'd get these little, basically what they were is like negatives, but they were actually in positive. Mm-hmm. And so you would put them into a reel, and then you'd get a big screen, and you'd turn the lights off, and then you'd push, and then it would project the pictures on the screen.
Right.
So everyone could share the photos and see them at the same time. It was a real fun family get together sort of thing to do that is completely lost on people today. But this is what she did with this thing. She had them developed into slides. So that's what she loved to do, because she liked to look at pictures with the whole family. So it wasn't, so I went up there. Okay. We developed them, but she put them into slides, and I don't think I did anything. I think I just basically did the instruction, which was develop the pictures, but I didn't look at them. I keep hitting this thing. I'm sorry. And so I then went up into the woods later on that week, or maybe even the following week, and tried to make contact with whoever these individuals were. And they said, you need to look at the pictures. And I said, okay. So that night I said to my grandma, can we look at the slides? And so it came up, and there was the picture of her that I took, and I called it the God is Love picture. So anytime over the years that I would want to look at the slide, I would just say, let's look at the God is Love slide. And they never knew why I called it that. They never made the connection that all of this was going on, because I never talked about any of this going on. So one day, I guess I was probably approaching 6 or had already reached 6 years old at this point. I went up there and I asked for them, and they said, we're going to be going away for a while, but we'll be back when you're older. That's what they said. And then there was nothing. Anytime I went up there was no interaction. Nothing happened at that point. So I'd say quite a few years went by. To the point that I was like 9 years old at this point. And, I was like hanging around, said, hey, why don't you get the God is Love slide out? I'm still calling it that. And she finally asked me, she says, why do you call it that? Not remembering anything about any of that other stuff. And I said, well, put it on, I'll show you. And so we went through the slides until we got to the picture I took that day. It was like early evening, late afternoon. And I said, see, it's the God is Love picture. And she goes, I don't understand why you call it that. I said, look on the television screen. So she's standing there in front of the television. Television is off. You can clearly see that it's in the off position. But the screen is completely visible because she's standing to the side of it. Mm-hmm. And on the screen is in white, glowing, golden calligraphy, God is love. It says it right on the TV screen. There's no way that could have gotten on the TV screen. The TV was off, and even if it had been on, it's kind of pretty bizarre that it would have captured it at that moment, that would have been on the television. So either way, even if you want to be a pure skeptic and say the TV had to have been on, still, okay, well then what are the odds that I would have snapped the picture at the moment that phrase was on the screen? Okay, but it wasn't on. And it was there in this very strange gold and white calligraphy that almost was glowing in the picture.
Came through the flash.
Yeah. And she nearly hit the floor. She couldn't believe it. So she blew this thing up and had a large picture of it. Kills me to this day because...
Yeah, didn't you can't find it now, right?
No one knows where it is.
No one knows where it is.
And I don't really deal with that side of the family anymore, so it's like it's lost time now.
That's too bad.
I don't have it, but it was definitively one of the most interesting things that happened. So later on in my, I guess 6 months into being 9 years old, I went up to the woods and I had the voices returned. And I knew immediately who they were, and this time I asked them. I said, "I want to see you," and they said, "Well, not yet, but soon." And so there was more interaction. They wanted to share insights with me about something. They wanted to teach me some things, which I would go back and they would teach me, but it would be like stuff that I couldn't remember. It's like I'd go up there and I know that I would be talking with them, but I couldn't remember the conversations.
It's aliens.
Well, that's what makes this interesting because when one day they finally did show themselves to me, and out from the distance, they didn't come close, but out from the distance, there were 3 very tall, humanoid, glowing white figures with no definitive characteristics.
I've heard that description before.
And so like the opposite of a shadow person,
Yeah.
but directly in your line of sight, not in the corner of your vision, and pure white light.
Almost angelic.
Almost angelic. And then they said that I will not be seeing them again, that everything that they needed to teach me is done. And that but they would always be with me, is what they said. So very angelic kind of experience. I've always interpreted it as an angelic experience. And it was definitely one of the most formative parts of my early childhood and what developed my spirituality later in life, because this was the very thing that was the catalyst for everything that I ended up doing later, because this is what made me get interested in things like religion, spirituality, metaphysics, and all the stuff that you like me talking about on this show. So that's story number 1. Okay. Story number 2. Let me go in order. I'm going to go in chronological order. So story number 2.
You were 9.
I'm trying to think.
The end of number 1.
That was 9. Okay. So the next story I have for you would have been when I was in seminary, or yes, I was in seminary. And then the next story would have been before seminary. Yeah, so let's do this one. Okay, so after high school, I went around the world traveling. I didn't go directly into college. I didn't feel I wanted to. I wanted to go on a spiritual journey. I've had plenty of them up to this point. Plenty of spiritual experiences up to this point, and I wanted to find myself. I wanted to figure out what I wanted to do with myself. I had already had my kind of encounter with God that was leading me towards the priesthood. I had already recognized my vocation, although I was trying to run from it. And I wanted to really figure out what it was I was going to do with myself. And so what I ended up doing was I ended up in the very tip of Cape Cod in Massachusetts. You know, if you look at the geography of the state of Massachusetts, it has this big hook out into the ocean. I was at the very tip of that hook. It's a town called Provincetown, very eclectic kind of town with a lot of artists, a lot of homosexuals live there, and a lot of occultists. So a very eclectic bunch, as you can imagine, and but a beautiful area, a beautiful part of the state, surrounded by ocean. It's like living on an island out there, and so it's a very Portuguese town because the Portuguese settled there and have been there ever since. You know, back to colonial times, right? So I was working in a Portuguese bakery at the time. It's kind of a staple out there. It's kind of a a tourist attraction, actually. They have this fried dough they call malasadas, kind of a very popular thing for people to eat while they're walking through town. Anyway,
they do the best custard pies, the Portuguese.
Those little pies, yes. I forget what they call them.
Me too.
But yes, it is a little custard pie. Anyway, so being that it was an occultist town with, like, every other shop is a New Age store, witchcraft store, whatever, you know, I became fascinated with this, of course, because of all of the other things that have been going on in my life, and I've never been one to run from any kind of spirituality. So I thought this is a great opportunity to explore a side of spirituality that I have not.
What were you, about 19 or so?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I should probably mention my age. So I was probably about 20.
Okay.
19 or 20. And so I went into the store and they had a collection of elaborate Ouija boards, like not the Parker Brothers game board, cardboard stuff. This was like real good quality Ouija boards made of wood, solid wood. And this one was a circular one with a circular planchette, and it just caught my eye. And I thought, oh my God, I gotta try this. I gotta get this. I gotta buy it. And it was kind of expensive, but I didn't care. I bought it and brought it home. And my father had been there at this time out there with me, and we had met up out there. And I also had a friend from the bakery that I worked at who was also interested in metaphysics and stuff like that. So I said, hey, wouldn't it be fun? Let's the three of us get together at night and do the Ouija board. Yeah, we'll light some candles. We'll make it dark and spooky. We'll go up, upstairs and just try it, right? So my father's name is Dennis, all right? This coworker's name is Alice, and that's important for what's about to, happen with this story. I think I've talked about this story before. So we went up and we did the Ouija board, and at first there wasn't much action going on, but as time went on, it started moving, and it was moving in a way that it felt like magnetism. Mm-hmm. Have you ever held like two magnets together and you feel that little tension?
Yeah.
This is what it felt like. It didn't feel like anyone was pushing it. I could definitely trust the people I was doing this with to not be playing games and pushing it around. So it started spelling out not just words. Initially, it was choppy. Then it started spelling words. Then it started giving dates. Then it started giving sentences that were so fast that eventually we got to a point where only two of us could put our hands on the planchette while the other one just wrote everything down because it was going this fast. Like my hand is, it was just moving across. You could barely even get the letters as it was collecting information. And through the course of this, it started telling us things. And it started to say that you needed to go to Las Vegas. You needed to find the eagle. And it started talking in riddles and strange things. And it said, if you go out there and you play this slot machine with this number at this time, you'll win the jackpot. it started giving information like that. Well, I said, okay, well, wait a second here. How do I know that you're real? And first of all, if it was saying that it was the spirit of somebody that died, I couldn't confirm the information it gave me. I went to the library to try to find if that was true. I couldn't find anything on the person that was being described here, but it did say they were a dead person, and that they were floating above us. I'd ask, where are you? They said, we're above you, or I'm above you. And I said, well, how would a dead person even know whether or not this slot machine is going to pay off in Vegas in a few weeks? I mean, this doesn't even make sense. But this is what it was telling me. And we were writing all this down, and we were starting to get interested to the point of, well, maybe we should follow it and see what happens, right? Let's see. So, but I was still skeptical, and I said, I need to know that you're not full of shit. And I think I actually said it just like that. And so it said, well, what would you want me to do to prove to you that I'm real? And I said, well, first of all, I want to see if you can predict the outcomes of random events, because you're telling me that the slot machine is going to pay off. I want to see. So I said, I'm going to go into, I had a roulette table back then. I said, I'm going to go into the other room and roll the roulette table, and I'm going to leave before it stops. And I want you to tell me before I spin it what the number is going to be. And I said, can you do that? And it said, yes. And I said, okay, let's do it. So what number is it going to be? It said it's going to be 18. So I went in the other room, spun the wheel, came out, went back in, waited for it to stop, looked at it. It was like 26 or something. It wasn't 18. We did this 3 times. It never predicted anything correctly. So I said, well, so why do you think the slot machine's going to work? Okay. So then I said, well, let's do something easier for you. You're right above me right now, right? You're looking down on me. You're looking down on the board. Yes, I am. I said, okay. Now what I want to do is I'm going to go in there and spin the wheel. And when it stops, I want you to float in there and go tell me what the number is. And then I'll go in and see if you're right. Because that should be easy to do. You don't have to predict it. You can watch it stop.
You just float on in there.
Float on in there and float on back and tell me what it is. Reasonable request, I think, right? I think I can bring Brandon back on now that I think hopefully his microphone's working. So we'll try bringing him back.
Is that better?
That's much better.
Oh,
My
yeah.
God, like 1,000 times better. Thank you, Father Chris, for your technological know-how. So anyway, I did it. So I said, okay, I'm going to go spin it. Will you do this? It said, yes. I'll go spin the wheel, came back, waited for it to stop. I said, okay, go in there and see what it is. Okay, goes in, comes back, like the board starts circling, comes back. Okay, what's the number? It's 35. Go in there. It's like 3. it's not even close.
Right.
Yeah, the 3. Yeah, I think it was like we did this like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
It could never tell me the number. So I said, there's something inherently problematic here, because if you're looking at the wheel, if you're really here in this room, then you can go into that room and look at it and tell me what it is. I don't know what it is, but you should be able to know what it is, right? And it could never tell me what the number was. So it said, I don't like this game. I want to play a different one. I said, okay, what do you want to do? And it said, you'll see. And I said, well, what is it? And it said, leave the room for 5 minutes and then come back. Okay. We'll leave the room for 5 minutes. Now, understand, I'm a really, really lousy housekeeper. I don't get into that kind of stuff. So my room was very dusty. And I had a television in there that was collected a layer of dust on the screen about this thick. So I went into, we did this is important information in a minute. Went out to the room, waited 5 minutes, came back in. I said, okay, we're looking around. We don't see anything any different. Nothing's going on. I said, so what you do? What are we doing here? And he said, you'll see, goodbye. And that was it. So at this point, I said to my father and Alice, I said, I guess it's over. So I'll walk you home. So I walked Alice home because it was late at this point and it was dark. So I walked her all the way to her house. And then I came back. Okay. And no one I locked I locked my room, so no one could get in there. And so I came back home by myself, opened up the room, and started to unwind. And I went to go turn on the television when I noticed that in the dust on my terribly filthy television screen was the words, I should say, "Hi, Brian. Hi, Dennis. Hi, Alice." But that wasn't what was really interesting about this. What was really interesting about this was that the dust collected upwards. In other words, think about if you're taking your finger to write in dust. If you're going to write an H for high, you're going to take the first line and go down, then you're going to go across, and then you're going to go down again, right? So the dust collection should be at the bottom of the H. This was at the top, as if it was written upside down, almost as if someone was floating upside down and was writing it upside down, because the dust was collecting up, or somebody would have been writing the letters backwards. Okay, because of where the dust was collecting. Now that, I have to say, was extremely unusual. I do not understand how that could have happened. I know that wasn't there before because it was so obvious once I sat down to watch the TV. Once you looked at the screen, you could not help but see it. So I knew it wasn't there before. And I could only surmise that this was whatever spirit we were communicating with the Ouija board that did this. Anyway, that's the only weird phenomenon that happened with that. So we did eventually go to Vegas, and we did find the slot machine it told us to play, and we lost. we didn't win a penny.
That's what you get for being a smartass to the spirit.
The only thing that did happen on that trip is that we were at a bar and Alice was playing the video poker that casinos have at their bars, and she did get a royal flush, but she panicked and hit the deal button and cleared it, and she would have won something like maybe, I don't know, $5,000 or $6,000, whatever it would have been, and she lost the money because she cleared it. She panicked. But anyway, that's the only weird thing that happened. I wouldn't say, though, that was a prediction from this Ouija board. So that's number 2. So let's get to story number 3. Now, this one is a very interesting one from my seminary years. Okay, so my seminary years, and maybe I'll stop at 3 because it looks like it's going to probably take me to the end of this hour, and I want to debrief in the next hour. So maybe I'll just do 3 stories tonight. But this one was, well, maybe I can kind of combine these two. So this one was in my seminary years. And I had left the seminary, but I was still pursuing the priesthood. I was going to put myself through undergrad because I didn't like the minor seminary. I wanted to go into the major seminary, which I did like. I did not like the minor seminary that was available for my diocese. So I worked out an agreement with the diocese that if I pay for my own private education to get through my undergrad, then I could go in as a major seminarian and go to the seminary that I did like. So I was at this point doing that. I was a freshman in college, and I was working in my parish as a adult education RCIA instructor, and doing other things, helping the nuns, doing all sorts of different things for the church, and also as a Eucharistic minister. I did everything. If I could do it as a layperson, I did it. Okay. And so I went to mass every morning at 7 a.m. So I was there every single day, front row. That was my life back then. And one day in the church, this was St. Edward's Parish in Palm Beach, Florida, on the island of Palm Beach. And I was in the front row, front pew, and my favorite priest, who's deceased now, I believe, Father Michael Woodcock, was serving the daily mass that day. When I noticed that people came in, 3 people came in, and, I don't know if you guys have ever been to daily mass. It seems to be a dying thing these days, unfortunately. But back then, it was still fairly prolific in Palm Beach. A lot of Catholics there, I guess. A lot of older Catholics, so they tend to go to mass, and they have the time to do it. And so it was the same people. We'd see the same people every day. It was always the same women, hardly any men. I was like the only male that was there for daily mass other than the priest. But a lot of older women there, and we had a good thing going on. And so I noticed the door open in the back, after the mass had started, but in the introductory rites. So it wasn't like too far along. And so I was like, look, that's unusual. No one ever comes in this late. No one even ever comes in. So who is this? Everyone that comes in is here. So I turned around and I noticed that 3 people were coming in, and it was the most bizarre spectacle you would ever imagine. There were 3 Semitic, Arab descent looking people, 1 male with 2 women. The women had their heads completely veiled. They were all dressed in white robes, but not like liturgical wear, like biblical wear. Almost like a movie for a biblical show. They looked like authentic clothing, but not stuff that people wear out. And he had a beard, a long beard, and dark Arab skin. All right, and with 2 dark-haired women, but they were covered with a white veil. You could only barely see what they looked like. And they immediately come in and sit directly behind me. And the women drop to the ground and kneel. And they won't get back up. And they get into this, they're praying something, they're whispering some prayer. And they did this the entire mass while he followed the order of the mass. So when we stood, and he would recite the prayers as the responses and everything else. So when it came to the sign of peace, I turned around to shake their hands, right? And that's what you do in a Roman Catholic church.
Ooh, not the women.
The women would not leave their prayer.
Yeah, we're not supposed to shake their hands anyway.
Well, in Vatican II, you do.
I'm talking about if they were Muslim.
No, these weren't Muslims.
Okay.
No, they weren't Muslims. They definitely knew the mass. And they had rosaries.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in their hands. I should have mentioned that. And so I turn around to shake the women. They're still kneeling and they're deep in prayer. So I looked at the man and I reached out my hand, and he grabs my hand and grabs it with both with this firm grasp and starts shaking it. And just looking me in the eye and won't let go. And it was the strangest thing, okay? So I'm like what? I'm like 22 years old at this point. 21, 22, something like that. Right? So then the mass continues, and that's when he lets go. And so we go through the whole mass, and as was customary for me, at the end of mass, I would go into the sacristy to chit chat with Father Woodcock, because anytime he would say mass, I would always go say hi, and we'd talk for a little while. And so I go up there and went into the sacristy. We was in there for maybe about 20 minutes chatting with him, and then I proceeded to walk out through the main area. And while I was walking out, they have pews. This is a very old, classic kind of church. So there's pews on the sides for like people with wheelchairs. Mm-hmm. And they were sitting right in front of the exit to the sacristy. And so the man with the 2 women on each side are just in there. And so I walk out, and I notice them, but I'm just like trying to be like, okay, I'm going to keep on walking because they're kind of strange. And
time to go.
Yeah. And then he gets up, and as soon as he gets up and I approach, the women drop down on their knees. And he says to me, he says, could I, in a very soft spoken voice, he had an accent, but I wouldn't say it was like a Arab accent. I mean, I'm not sure what it was, honestly. It was a strange accent. And he's in a very quiet voice, very soft-spoken voice. He says, "Could I speak with you for a moment?" And I said, "Of course. You know, it's my parish, and I'm kind of like one of the liaison. I'm a liaison there, you know. So it's like I didn't know if he needed services or something. I didn't know. I mean, they were very strange people. So it's like you see strange people in churches. So it wasn't terribly out of character, but there was something weird about them. And so I said, "Sure, I'd be happy to talk with you." So he says, please sit. And I said, "Okay, I'll sit with." So he grabs my hand. And he won't let go of it. And he says to me, I have something very important to tell you. And I said, "Okay." And he says, "You have a great mission. You know this, right?" And I said, "A great mission?" I'm not sure I know what you're referring to. What are you referring to? He says, you are to become a priest. And I said, "Well, that's the goal. That's what I'm hoping." But I said, I don't know if it'll happen at this point because I can't get through seminary. I'm thinking, who knows what could happen at this point? But I said, that's the plan. I said, I'm trying to laugh it off, and he's being so serious about it. And he goes, "No," he says, you're to be more than a priest. And he says, "You are going to lead a great many people." And he says, you have a very important mission for God, and I need you to know how important this is, that you cannot choose to walk away from it. Because he says, "I know you are trying." And he says, "You can't walk away from this." And he says, I was sent to make sure that you understand this." And I said, "You were sent by who?" And he just smiles. And the women are just on their knees right beside.
Angelic encounter.
It was very much like that, but this was very physical because this guy kept grabbing me, and he wouldn't let go, And it was a tight grip. I mean, he was like grabbing me like this. It was like cutting off circulation.
But they don't know how to act in.
No, they don't. They don't.
So they're very awkward.
And so I said, "Well, thank you for that information. I don't plan to walk away." And he says, "Well, you'll be tried." He says, you're going to go through many trials, but he says, "You're going to lead a great many people, and it is not something that you can walk away from," or something to that effect. And I said, well, thank you. I will do my best.
Appreciate it. Have a good day.
So I got home right after that, and I called Father Woodcock on the phone, and I said, "Did you see people behind me?" Because at this point I wasn't sure if I was like hallucinating or if this was truly like an angelic vision or something. And he says, "Yeah, I saw three people behind you." I said, "Have you ever seen them before?" He says, "I think they've come in a couple times before. They were looking for somebody, but I'm not sure who they were looking for." He says, "But they're not part of the parish." And he says, they seem to be visitors. I said, "Well, let me tell you what just happened when I left Mass just now." And I told him everything, and he giggled, and he says, "Maybe you're going to be the next Pope." I said,
Yeah.
I said, "Well, God, I hope not." But anyway, it was an interesting encounter. Okay, so take from that what you will. I don't know whether or not you can extrapolate anything from that that is authentic. Or whether or not you think that what I do now falls into that category. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. It's kind of ambiguous. Is this the grand vision that I thought of when he was telling me that story? No. I mean, when I thought that I would be leading a great many people, I was thinking that I would have a big parish in the Roman Catholic Church, with 20, 30,000 families like some of the, churches had in the Diocese of Palm Beach, because that's a big Catholic diocese and it's a very prosperous one for the area. So I was thinking something like that. I was definitely not thinking, being this avant-garde, nutty little bishop that ends up on TV one day. Is that what he's talking about? I don't know. Okay, these are all examples of psychic experiences that can lead people in certain directions, can influence your life in a profound way, but not necessarily become clear. So let's do this, okay? Because there is another story I do want to tell that I can shorten, and I do want to get to some of your questions, but let's go ahead and take a break now. And then when I come back, I will tell you the last story, and then we're going to start breaking down what's really going on here and trying to help you avoid the psychic seductions that can sometimes happen with visions of this nature. Don't go away.
The number you have dialed is not available at present. Please leave your message after the beep.
Hey, it's me. I just wanted to let you know I miss you. I know we haven't spoken in a while,
Welcome back, everyone, to the third and final part of Vestiges After Dark. When we come back here, I'll finish with my fourth story. I'll try to make that one quick. I don't want to waste the third hour talking too much about the stories. I want to start getting into the conclusion here, which is how to recognize psychic seduction and what causes it, actually. And then take some of your questions, because I'm sure you have some. And I'm looking at the chat, and my gosh, you guys are really impressing me. Danielle, in particular, with Mystic out there, thought, what if those three people in the church were the three figures I saw as a child in the woods? I did not think of that. That was not something that ever came to my mind about this at any point. And I've thought about these things a lot. So a fascinating connection there, possibly. I don't know. Let's talk about it when we come back. Okay, so when, as you all know, I've studied the esotericism various esoteric arts and sciences going back through all these years, and this is why. These stories I'm telling you tonight are what led me to this kind of seeking, because religion didn't always have the answers. When I would go to the nuns and explain the kinds of things I was experiencing, usually their advice would be to not think about it, to ignore it, and to just pray and focus on God and not worry about, not think about the experiences, which is okay, I guess. And it's not terrible advice. But when you're being hit with these kinds of encounters on a semi-regular basis, that seems to be leading you in some kind of direction, seems to be leading your life in some kind of direction, it's hard not to pay attention to it. And you want to make sure you get it right, which is what my main concern was. So when the church wasn't giving me the kind of advice I felt that I needed, I started searching elsewhere for it, and that's when I did pursue things in occultism to try to get the answers I needed, when religion just didn't have them. And a lot of the people that are, operate parishes as pastors or whatnot are very secular people, believe it or not. So they're not really necessarily well equipped to deal with spiritual things like what I've described tonight, which was, I don't consider myself to be a mystic in the saintly church sense, but I've had mystical experiences that require, as St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila and some of these great mystics were, as they needed help. And they even found that the church wasn't necessarily giving it to them. That's how St. Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross found each other, because they could help each other as fellow mystics. When you have mystical experiences, it's very difficult to communicate with people who have never had one. They don't know what it's like, and they don't know how to give you advice, particularly in a religious sense. So they just tell you to ignore it. I was not happy with that. So I pursued everything. If it could give me answers, I would look for it. So yeah, this is when I started studying divination. Why I've studied the tarot for 30 years. I find value in it.
That's exactly what happened to me after my NDE.
Yeah.
I started looking outside the church.
And that's what sometimes it leads you to do. You go outside the box. I'm a good one to find because I can keep you in the church, but help you, outside of it too. But anyway, and that's what I really wanted. I wanted to not leave the church. I wanted to be able to explore outside the box when the situation called for it. I felt this was one of those times. So anyway, I got into scrying and automatic writing. I was proficient in this, like in a profound way. I mean, scrying could produce visions that were incredible. I remember I had a black mirror and I was doing a scrying one night and I saw myself at a traffic light. And I saw the car I was in get completely smashed, like a soda can. And I saw myself die in the scrying mirror, in the black mirror. The black mirror is in there if you want to see it. I still have it. And I didn't know what it meant. And so I just kind of took it in and thought about it, and it disturbed me. And the next day I was driving and I was at an intersection and I wasn't really thinking about the day before. And then I just started looking around and I said, this looks familiar. And then it occurred to me, wait, this is what I saw in the mirror last night. And it like, I cannot describe to you the compulsion, but I felt so compelled to literally pull my car into the shoulder that I did in the middle of the red light. I pulled out of the road and went into the shoulder. And just as that happened, this car comes barreling through and goes right through the red light. And I didn't get hit because I moved. Now that was something. That was something sincere and genuine. That was a genuine psychic experience. Okay. But when I got into automatic writing, I was getting a lot of profound. I have books and books, piles of journals, like these, journal books that you get at Barnes and Noble, packed with information that I collected from automatic writing sessions over several years that follow a cohesive story of these entities that call themselves celestials, trying to help me to navigate around these other entities they call the adversaries. And to do this, to move to Las Vegas, to find this person, to find that person. If you do this, this will happen. Very clear, precise instruction that went on for years. I did every one of those things, and nothing ever happened. That was said it would. I actually moved to Las Vegas because of those journals, because of those encounters with automatic, and none of it happened. Now, I did say I would find somebody, that I needed to find someone in Las Vegas that would become a intrinsic colleague of mine. So one might be able to say, is that Zach Bagans? Was I just 20 years too early? I don't know.
Time to them is irrelevant.
Time's irrelevant, and sometimes the information gets lost. So I don't know. I can't tell you, but I tell you these stories because I'm giving you a wide range, some religious, mystical, some paranormal, some psychic, some where they had tangible results, some where there were no tangible results. It's like I felt like my life was just leading in I was doing all these things and nothing was happening. It's like I feel like I'm following a lie. Now, how does this relate to the plethora of psychic ability and the risk of psychic seduction? So what do I mean by psychic seduction? Let's start with that first. Then we'll understand how we define what is real, because that's necessary prerequisites to getting into the answer here. So first of all, psychic seduction, as I kind of alluded to before, is getting a psychic impression and living your life according to it. But once you do so, none of it actually happens. And you're like, you feel like a fool. So you get this inspiration. I'm going to go and do this. I'm going to move here. I'm going to do that. I'm going to find this person. I'm looking for that person. I'm going to get into this relationship. I'm going to find that job, whatever it is. And then you do all the things that this psychic vision or spiritual thing tells you, and then nothing happens. And then it starts to make you wonder, well, maybe it's all in my head. Well, that's part of the problem, is that it's always going to be all in your head, whether it's real or not, whether it's authentic or not, whether it's a real message or not. It's always going through your head. Okay? Because that's where you have experiences here. That's the vehicle through which these experiences happen. So the authentic ones as well as the gibberish ones come through the same channel. And we can influence that very easily. So this gets us into, well, what is real? Well, most of us define reality as that which is tangibly true to all observers. So I'm talking to you right now. I'm looking at a camera, and Jamie can see that camera, and we can both agree that's a camera. We know that's what it is. Okay. And if you guys were here, all you, and you looked at the camera, I wouldn't have to tell you it's a camera. You just know it's a camera. That seems like reality, because all observers are agreeing that this tangible object that we can all hold and we can all use, and it does the same thing for all of us. We can all agree that this is what it is. That's a camera. This is a table. This is a mouse. No one's going to dispute this. Okay? And we think that's reality. That's not reality. Reality, what is real, or perhaps better termed, what is authentic, is what is forever. Eternity. That's what's real. If something cannot last forever, it is not intrinsically real. The temporary is not real. And let me explain to you why that is. Because right now we're all here, we're on this planet, and we feel real, don't we? I mean, we're having this conversation right now. We're watching, watching Vestiges After Dark, and we're having these deep-rooted conversations in philosophy. But 100 million years from now, or let's make it even more realistic, 10 billion years from now, this planet will not be here. None of these recordings are going to be preserved. The human race probably will not exist. This earth will be consumed by the swelling of the sun as it becomes a red giant. It's already in its dying years as a yellow star. It will eventually encompass the habitable zone of the solar system. And for a moment, let's just assume there is nothing else out there. None of this will exist anymore. And if it doesn't exist in the moment that's now, even if it might have existed before, it doesn't exist now, which means that it doesn't really have any reality to it, because it can't endure through eternity. In other words, for something to be real, philosophically true, to be philosophically real, you would have to be at any point in time to say, does this exist now? And the answer needs to be yes. If it existed before but no longer anymore, anything within entropy, and I'm sorry for keep hitting the microphone, but my hands go wild when I talk about stuff like this. Anything that exists within entropy doesn't exist at all, because eventually its end conclusion is non-existence. It all gets absorbed into nothingness. And so this is inherently what makes the message of Christianity a unique message, because people keep talking about, I want to go to heaven. No, you don't. You want eternal life. Jesus grants eternal life. He very rarely ever refers to it as heaven. He talks about the kingdom when he wants to use that as an allegory for, ushering in the new way of following under this relationship with him. But when he talks about the brass tacks of what he's actually giving you, what salvation really is, it's eternal life. It's eternity he gives you. Restores you back to that condition. Go ahead.
That's why the church spent. So I mean, I get accused a lot in my day-to-day life of being obsessed with theology, as in, oh, there's things that exist outside theology. And my answer is no, there isn't actually.
No.
And actually, the creedal claims of the Christian church are really important. They're not just add-ons, not just things that we say to get us through the liturgy. I'll come to the point. I don't want to waste any time. Most of what the ecumenical councils were arguing about, almost the entirety of it, was what is Jesus Christ? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily the who, but the what.
The what?
What was Jesus Christ?
Mm-hmm.
And we know that authentic Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, says he is all man and all God. And the crux of what you're talking about, what is truly real, are the things that are eternal.
Mm-hmm.
And why this is so important and why Christianity is the true religion is because, therefore, that sacrifice on the cross, although it happens in time, because he is an eternal as well as a temporal being, it's eternally present.
Yes.
And therefore we can look back and forward to the cross.
And that's why it has retroactive.
Experience that now,
and that's why it has even retroactive characteristics, like the harrowing of hell.
It saves Moses. It saves Moses,
and also is essentially how the Virgin Mother is also participant as a participant in salvation, because that grace it retroactively works on her. I mean, it gets into a lot of the complexities of hyperdulia, but as we break down theology as it exists, it's talking about the things that endure, because we take time for granted. Okay, we think that time's a real thing, past, present, and future, so that the past exists. No, the past does not exist. If it exists, you could go there. You could experience it now, but you can't. And I don't think there will ever be a time machine that can take us back. I don't think we can go forward, because that's a manipulation of the forward momentum of the unidirectional aspects of movement. But I don't think we can ever go back. And the reason for that is that it doesn't really exist. Even a memory does not really exist. There's nothing that you can tangibly hold on to and say, here's the experience again. So, like, was I in Mexico? Well, that feels real, but does it feel any more real than the dream I had last night? Not really anymore. I'm not there. I'm not walking by the temples. I can recall the information, so the information's real because the information endures. That's what's real, the information, okay? The only thing in entropy that lasts, that endures, that violates the laws of physics is information. This is how spooky action at a distance works. This is how the double slit experiment works, all these crazy things in physics. This is, what is it, superposition, I think it's called. All of these things are the result of this interaction of information being the eternal reality. There's also a difference between the participant and the observer. We get them confused.
So it's the same thing as an experience?
Well, in a sense that the experience is the action, but the action can't last, but the observer's always watching. So when you break down, and I know this sounds very esoteric, and you're like, what does this have to do with psychic seduction, Bishop? I mean, I thought this was the topic tonight. Trust me, you need all this background, because you're not going to understand anything later if I don't give it to you. I guess let's get into that. Okay.
Well, it's very T.S. Eliot, this.
I guess it is. Yeah, it is. It is.
I've got a quote at this time.
Go for it.
Well, so this is T.S. Eliot from The Rock, 1934. All our knowledge brings us near to our ignorance. All our ignorance brings us nearer to death. But nearness to death, no nearer to God. Where is the life that we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom that we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? The cycles of heaven in 20 centuries bring us farther from God, nearer to the dust.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. So let's think about reality as what, first of all, the first rule for something to be real is it has to be forever. It can't, if it can at any point in time no longer exist, then it was never real to begin with. The only things that are real are things that will always have been and always will be. Everything else doesn't really exist. So the only thing we know of outside of God, okay, and you could say that we don't really know much about him, so we can exclude God as part of this equation for a moment. The only thing we can be sure of, I guess, scientifically in this universe to exist forever is information. Now, we can call that energy by knowing that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So that's a law of physics that we know to be true. Doesn't mean cohesion of energy, though. So you can't, these new agers that want to say that this is proof of the afterlife, because energy can't, we're energy. No. You are a cohesive energy. And that cohesion breaks down. So that's not proof of anything. But the information's always there. It doesn't mean the information's what you think you are. The information's not the actor. The information is only processed by the observer, and there's only one observer. That's truly the divine. Okay? And that's ultimately what we come back to. And that's what we become. That's the beatific vision, to be part of that observation of the universe, and then thus the true participant, because then we can exist forever in that reality. But that's, again, another theological.
That's very much Jewish eschatology.
It is. Well. It is.
That's consistent.
It is very, very consistent with our foundation there. So let's now take this further. So now we know that real has to be eternal, and now we also know that the only thing that's eternal that we know of is information. I mean, they're even saying that information doesn't even get destroyed in a black hole. I mean, even physicists are now coming to this conclusion that information cannot be lost. It's there. It's there. And how that happens, they don't know. But we know it does. So what are you other than information? Okay? What makes you different than information right now is that right now you can process it as both observer, participant, with the information. But death separates those three realities. You no longer can be the participant, okay, because there's nothing to participate. There's nothing that you can use to participate. And then the information stays, but now you're no longer you've separated from the observer, unless you have connected yourself to the divine, which is, again, we're talking about higher level things of salvation. If you want to get Buddhist, you can call this enlightenment. But either way, there is a separation there. But death doesn't necessarily produce that. So there's going to be, for people who do not die well, which is going to be the most of us out there right now, because spirituality has been cast aside as unimportant. And so people are still dying, but nobody's doing anything about that while they're living. So they're not prepared for this. Well, so just because you're dead doesn't mean all of a sudden now your reality is so different. No, you're still going to have the same beliefs, the same biases about your reality, and you will create with that information a cohesion that will last for as long as you can hold it together until it's no longer relevant. And that's what we would call a ghost. So a medium who's trying to communicate with your dead relatives is not talking to your dead relatives. It's talking to the information that your dead relatives had access to, because that's always there. Now, theosophists have tried to kind of break this barrier, and they've done a fairly decent job with the Akashic records. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. It's kind of the same thing. But the problem is what when you get talking to mediums and they start telling you that this person's in the afterlife and they're doing this and they're watching over you and they're doing... all they're doing is reading the information. It's not the relative. The relative has deceased. It's broken down. The energy's gone, right? The cohesion's gone. If they went to heaven, they're now the observer. Yeah, I guess they are watching over you, but they're watching over you in the same sense that God watches over you. And it's not going to be a human experience there. Not yet. That comes later. Now, that's when we start getting into the resurrection of the dead, the end of time. There is a point where things are restored into their original perfection, and there is tangibility to that. That does come. And in a way, you could say it's already come, because that's in a timeless condition. And if something's timeless, then it's always been, which means that if you're going to heaven, you're already in heaven. You're already there. You just haven't caught up with it yet. because heaven is timeless. Heaven is infinity. And if you're in heaven, then that means you've always been there, even though you currently can't conceive of having done that yet. That's the complexity and the paradox that we're dealing with here. And this is the separation between what is real and what is imaginary. Right now, you are imaginary. You think you're real, but that's the fallen state. That's the metaphysics of the fallen state. What is the fallen state? When we talk about sin and we talk about corruption and evil, but what is really at the heart of it has none of the thing to do. Those are just accidents of it. Those are just like symptoms of it. The actual disease of the fallen world is that we are no longer real. We have become imaginary because now we live within our own egos, which don't really exist. There's kind of nothing to be separated from God. The only reason why we exist at all, even in this imaginary sense, is because of the grace of God to bring us back to reality. Otherwise, we would just pass into the oblivion of imagination with the rest of the fictions that we create out there. This is what's happening with psychic ability. This is what creates psychic seduction, because people can be very sensitive to this ethereal information and it feels tangible and real. Of course it is. Because it's as real as you dealing with your day-to-day affairs right now. You're not going to go up there tomorrow and have breakfast and eat your eggs and bacon and say this is an imaginary meal. You're going to taste it. You're going to experience it. It's going to nourish you. It's going to give you energy for the day. You're going to be able to go to work and live off of that. So it's going to have all the actions of reality, but none of the intrinsic function of reality, which is to endure. Can this eggs and bacon breakfast you're having tomorrow going to lead you to eternity? No. Is it going to give you immortality? No, it can't. It won't exist anymore. In fact, it doesn't exist now because that's tomorrow's dinner. It doesn't exist yet. And even when you're in the moment of now, how long can you hold it? I mean, every time I eat a good meal, I was like, I had some great meals last week. They're all gone now, right? I'm not tasting them anymore. I can't make them happen right now. They don't exist, and they didn't exist when I was eating them. I was having an imaginary experience in the same way that you dream and you wake up and while you're in it, feels so real. And you're like, gosh, that was such a real dream. And then you wake up and it's like, okay, no, I'm awake. And you can barely remember the dream 5 seconds later. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's what life is like. That is life right now. It's a more dense version of it. And because of the fallen state and our dissociation from actuality, and because we're disconnected from what real is, the only reality, which is God, then we're even further removed. And the only way we can keep it going is to keep the imagination going. So what we focus on is the activity of the information, and your brain is the processor of that information. So consciousness is the processing of information that isn't real. And what produces that action is the truth of the observer, which is awareness. Okay, the awareness is real because we're always in a state of observation. And this is, again, getting back into the double slit experiment in physics, that when particles are observed, they suddenly become real. Mm-hmm. When they're no longer observed, they could be anything. It could be a wave or a particle. Who knows? It's in potential only. But as soon as it's observed, even if it's not a human observer, even if it's a camera, even if it's a sensor, even if it's a computer, an artificial structure making an observation, it still works as though it's real. It becomes real for that moment. That's not reality. That's a rendering, almost like a video game. And we've talked about that. And we talked about this leads to like simulation theory. And I'm not suggesting that this is a simulation, but I'm trying to explain that when the Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism talk about the illusory nature of reality, the Maya, this is what they're referring to. The information is real, but the appearances are not. All right. And you are an appearance. And so when a medium tries to communicate with your dead relative, they're not reading any authenticity there. They're reading just the appearance of the information, and they're imprinting their own perspective into it. And I hate to break it to you, but even though a lot of mediums hate Christianity, their worldview is entirely modeled by it. And it's not even modeled by a good version of the theology. It's modeled by the incorrect one, the idea that, we become angels and go to heaven or some nonsense like that. Not even modeled on eternal life, not even modeled on the resurrection of the dead. it's modeled on this idea that, we're up in heaven immediately and everybody goes and all this nonsense. That's all a bastardization of the Christian worldview. Have you noticed how Buddhists and Hindus don't really give a damn about mediums? They don't get into it. You know why? Because they understand that it's all illusion. That's why they don't get into it. There's no value to it. There's no point in it. It's just another aspect of of the delusions that we've imprinted upon ourselves as part of the fallen world. And I one up you with it, which makes it even more perilous for those of you who are not prepared to die well, okay? Because you're not doing the work, and you need to do the work, all right? Here's the real danger. The illusion doesn't end just because you die, all right? As long as the information is available and there's still a cohesion of experience, which is possible, then you will still continue to perpetuate the illusion. So you could very easily think you end up in the afterlife, and it could be this wonderful, great place, and you're like, oh my God, I've made it to heaven. Oh, there's Jesus over there right now. And it's all illusion. You haven't found anything. You're just continuing the lie that you're living right now. This is what Buddhism is really trying to teach, and this is one of its metaphysical values, okay? That's why I say, when I tell people and they get shocked and I say, Christianity didn't mean anything to me until I became a Buddhist. Then all of a sudden Christianity made sense. And this is why. Because Christianity is lacking the metaphysics. Buddhism has the metaphysics. Buddhism is lacking the theological direction. But it's got the metaphysics. You put them together, now you get the best of both worlds. And they blend perfectly. They're not in opposition to each other. They really are not. Because Buddhism doesn't have any need for God. All right, Buddhism is a praxis. It's a methodology of realization. It can lead you to God if you want it to, or it can lead you to any kind of realization. But what it will ultimately help you realize is the illusory nature of all things. And then once you have realized what's illusion, then you can find reality. And by doing so, if you're so inclined, you find God. This is how it worked for me. Okay, this is what happened exactly with me. This is what Buddhist meditation led me to. This very realization that I'm sharing with you now. And by doing so, it was through Buddhism that I found God. And the God that I found was not some weird Buddhist God or some Eastern God or some other kind of crazy God, but the Christian God. That's what I found there. Okay, that's why I became Christian, because it was revealed to me. Not as a Christian, as a Buddhist, which I thought was pretty amazing, actually. Anyway, that's besides the point. So when you have a psychic event, you're reading information. You're not reading reality. You're just reading the story in a different way, at a different level, but it's still the story, okay? You have to know how to discern beyond that. So how do you get from the automatic writing event that I described to the scrying event that saved my life? Or what about the visions in the woods that resulted in some profound experiences that shaped my life? Or the event that happened in church, which is open to, I guess, discussion. Do you feel that this has been this prophecy that was shared with me by these three people in church? Do you think it happened? Is this the ministry they foresaw? Is this the one that I'm supposed to do? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. We can talk about that when I'm done here, and I'm almost done, I promise. But the ultimate thing that you need to understand is, how do you tell the difference? Okay, so here's what you need to do. You cannot, under any circumstances, and this is where Buddhism is paramount, but Christianity can help too if you use the right things. You cannot imprint any conscious thought into the experience at all, whatsoever. You cannot imprint any conscious thought. Consciousness is your enemy in psychic experiences every single time. This is what I teach my students when they do divination. I teach them how to unconsciously experience it. When you're trying to formulate a question to ask the tarot cards, for example, I teach them how to purge the thought from the mind so that the expectation cannot imprint. This is what happens with self-fulfilling prophecy. This is what happens with placebo effect. Okay, we create our own reality. We're made in the image of God. We're natural creators. Whether we want to be or not, that's what we do. And we create stories. That's how we live. All right. None of this is the reality that God intended for us. This is the fallen world. It's all our fabrication. It's some bastard child of creation. And it's all us. And it's why it sucks so bad. That's why it's got so much violence and why there's so much pain and unnecessary sorrow. Okay? Because this is our reality. This is what we create out of our delusions, out of our ignorance, out of our attachments. Right? When we reconcile those things, and Buddhism does a great job of teaching you how to do that. Now, like I said, it's great for practice. Not necessarily great for theology or finding God or having relations with God, because it doesn't focus on that. Buddhism doesn't see the value in that. What Buddhism sees is seeing things as they are. Once you do that, then if you have an encounter that with something that's greater than yourself, then you're prepared for it. So a Buddhist would probably say, although they probably wouldn't use these exact words, but a Buddhist would probably say that until you've made the realization, you have no business even searching for God, because all you're going to find is an idol. And they're right, because that's what most of you have. You have an image of God in your head that you created. It's not the one that God is. It's what you want God to be. This is why, the mega churches make billions of dollars, and the Holy Nicolean Catholic Church has, two sticks to rub together. That's why.
Oh, but it's also the reason that formerly mainstream churches that are now dying.
It is.
It's the reason they're dying as well, because they've created God in the image of their own ideology.
And that's the illusion.
It's not true.
No, that's the illusion of it, and that's where we're at with all of this stuff. So, when you're doing any kind of psychic activity, understand that most of the information you're going to get from you. Okay, I've got 3 more minutes, and I'll save the next, the remainder for your questions. When you get any kind of psychic experience, or even try to pursue or cultivate one, understand that unless you are absolutely certain that you have completely removed all consciousness from the equation, you have to assume you're dealing with a lie. Now, there might be truths in there that kind of find their way in, because your consciousness is actually quite weak and it's not going to be able to influence the entire message. But understand that most of the time when you're doing your tarot cards, you're just getting reflections of what you want or what you fear.
I think that was going on with, one of my relatives consulted a medium. I think, as I've said on this show, my sister was murdered when she was very young.
I remember that.
Yeah. And so it's understandable that, people reach out in these ways, but and they were telling them all sorts of things about various family members because they were asking, and then they said, and what about Chris? And I think I've said it on the show, that the medium said, I know who you're talking about, but I can't even see him because he's surrounded by white light I can't see. And, I just think that was my guardian angel saying, piss off.
It probably was. So yeah, I don't want to give the impression that I'm saying that psychics are bullshit, mediums are bullshit. If I felt that way, I wouldn't have them on the show, right? I'd just be talking about how horrible they are for leading people astray. That's not what I think. I think there are people that have a good grasp on how to do this without imprinting their consciousness into it, but I think that's really hard for most of them. Okay, so I do think, yes, even on this show, we've had guests that do imprint too much of their own impressions into it. They don't know how to separate what they want to be true from what is true, but they can see enough of the information that they can still be helpful. Okay, but understand that no medium can talk to the dead without God actually permitting it, which God almost never does. So the only thing they can talk to is the impression that is left. And it is alive as you are right now, because you're just an impression that's left right now. Like I said, if you've made it to heaven, then you're already there. You have to be, because heaven is in eternity. You would have always been there, and you will always be there if you're there at all. So the fact that you perceive that you're not there is proof that you are deluding yourself right now. So you either would not exist at all, which is what hell is, or you're in heaven, which is what salvation is. Or if you want to use more Buddhist terminology, nirvana or samsara. In fact, Buddhists say, what's the difference between nirvana and samsara? Well, samsara just doesn't know they're in nirvana. And that's true. And that's what you are. So if you are saved, you're already saved and you're there. And if you're not saved, you've never existed. You don't exist now. You're just holding on. And that gets eventually sorted out by the dispersion of energy. And that's kind of what the end times is. That's real eschatology right there. It's just not colored and flavored with all sorts of biblical allegory. But that's what it is. Okay, that's the danger. So understand that if you're putting any kind of impression of your own consciousness into the psychic experience, you have to always assume it's lying to you. There might be little fractions of truth that you're going to pick up on and say, oh, this is something. But it's dangerous to follow. Trust me, I did it and it nearly destroyed my life because I made a lot of decisions I shouldn't have made that led to a lot of problems that took years to resolve following after these psychic visions, okay? Because I had so many of them and so many of them were true. But see, when I was a child at 4 years old, there wasn't a whole lot of ego to put into those impressions.
Right.
So I could have them in a pure sense. And I didn't know what I was experiencing. I just knew I was experiencing it. And it was completely outside of my consciousness. It was just a direct experience. But as I got older and I wanted to actually play with these things, try to harness the energy using scrying, using automatic writing, tarot cards, whatever, then I realized I could manipulate it. And it would just, the universe is like a fax machine. It's like a Xerox machine. It just copies whatever your thoughts are. And it does not know the difference between reality and fiction because there is no difference between reality and fiction in this reality. Nothing's eternal here. So everything here is fiction. So it doesn't matter if you're writing a book, performing a stage play, going on a movie, being an actor in a film, or, trying to manifest some kind of dream that you have with witchcraft. It doesn't know the difference. So if it's seeing that you're imprinting a dream into the ether because you've got all this desire and attachment associated with it, then guess what? It's going to say, oh, it already happened. There it is. It's in your mind. That dream you have, you just saw it. So it's real now. It's not going to make it more tangible so that you can actually live that life. It's just going to create the clouds in the sky for you to follow. So in order to get it to become tangible, in a sense that it becomes authentic and enduring, where you're actually reading the information that is eternal as it is, your conscious mind cannot play a role at all.
I think that's what makes paranormal investigation so hard sometimes, is because when you walk into a location you've never been there and you bring a medium with you, say they do their walkthrough, they don't know anything about the location, which a lot of good psychics, that's what they do. They go in blindfolded, don't know anything about the location. I think they tap into the impressions left behind by whatever happened there. But the longer you're in the location, you can't help but start to impress your thoughts and your ego into receiving the evidence that you're getting. And I think that's when stuff starts to get really convoluted and evidence gets really contaminated.
It's like the EVPs. I mean,
right. The longer you're there, you're gonna start hearing what you want to hear.
And you're not talking to the dead. You're talking to the information. And some of that information might be from the dead, but it's not them. It's just the information. Okay? If you ever see Ogden Possession again on Ghost Adventures, when Aaron is in the closet and he's doing the spirit box, SB7, and he's asking questions and he's asking about the bishop, and then it says something. I don't remember what it was. It said bishop or something, I think. Listen to it. It's my voice.
Yeah.
It's my voice.
And I don't think we got that until it aired.
No. I don't even think they still got it. I don't think we ever talked to them about it. I probably should next time I see them.
That's why I don't think overnight investigations end up being very fruitful. You may get a lot of experiences and evidence, but I think the longer you're there, the more that your ego, your consciousness is going to influence what you get.
That's right. Okay, so I took way too much time there, but we still have a few minutes, so I can probably answer some questions quickly. So Brandon, Father Chris, Jamie, whoever wants to go.
We had one.
We got
Go ahead.
We got two questions. I got one real quick.
Okay.
Kind of goes back to your Ouija board story.
Okay.
A lot of times when we go out on investigations and we do Facebook Live, one of the things we'll do is me and a couple others that use dowsing rods. We will blindfold ourselves, and the spirits we're communicating with will ask them, "Can you point to such and such person?" But we're blindfolded, and it might get maybe one or two right, or the rods just won't move at all, and the rest will get wrong. So is that kind of the same thing going on as to with the Ouija board story, with the roulette table, it was never right? Is that kind of the same thing?
It is kind of the same thing, because if your conscious mind isn't directing it, which is usually how Ouija boards work, Ouija boards are basically talking to your subconscious mind. They're not talking to the dead at all. And the reason why it couldn't read the number on the roulette wheel is because it was my own mind. And unless I was in there to see what it was, it couldn't tell me what it was. That's all it was. Now, what about the words on the screen? I do think that is an exercise in telekinesis. So I do think my expectation imprinted that into the screen. I think we can do that. And I think that's how we're able to do all sorts of manifestations that we can capture with paranormal equipment and whatnot. With dowsing rods, yes, it is. You're talking to the subconscious. That doesn't mean it's bad information, though. If your subconscious is truly detached, you can get a lot of information that's very accurate from it. And that's true psychic ability. And a good psychic knows how to do this naturally. They might not even know that's what they're doing, but they can do it naturally. So, yes, it is the same thing.
Okay. And a question from Mystic. She says, I'm a psychic. Would you say my ability is more just being able to access the universe's filing cabinet and access information?
I think that's all what psychic ability. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't know there was more.
Sorry. As you said, and if so, should we be reclassifying mediums?
I do think we should reclassify it because I think it's deceptive. I don't think they'd like to know that, though. And I don't think a lot of them would agree with what I've said tonight because I think it's become a sort of identity. I think mediums like to be thought of as those special people who can talk to the dead. And I don't think they want to lose that identity. So if they need that, then by all means, I'm not going to try to take it away from them. But at the same time, I do think that we always can get to a better understanding of the truth. And what we take for granted is not necessarily the best information that we have. So, yeah, I do think it is a filing cabinet. I think that's what psychics are actually collecting. I think the Theosophists were correct with the Akashic Records. I think that's a really true representation of what's out there. But I do think it's just information. I don't think it is anything tangible because I would say all we are right now is information. Until we are made real, which is what salvation is, to be made real, to be made eternal. Okay, that's why there's a relationship between those two things. We are still just information. And if the information does not get...
I was coming on to that.
Were you?
I was just thinking, I was reflecting on that in as much as... Because I think a mistaken conclusion you could come to from what you presented, I don't think this is what you've presented. I'm saying this could be a mistake that people made.
Right.
It is that basically life is therefore meaningless. But... because, as you said, the truth of the revelation of Jesus Christ is true. It brought me back to the whole faith works argument because basically my reflection on what you said is it affirms the fact that the only true effective works that could possibly take place are those works done in the name of the Eternal One.
Yep.
And therefore, works without faith don't earn us anything at all. It's just more information being piled in. And faith without works means we live a life where we don't instantiate anything of God. Or, sorry, I've gone a step too far. Anything that's real at all.
That is absolutely a brilliant way to put it. And that is exactly what it is. It comes back to, ultimately, if you look at life and you feel like it's nihilistic, it doesn't mean anything, then you're missing the point. Because what I've presented here, for those of you who might have initially fallen into the trap that Father Chris exposed here, and it is a perfectly valid direction that people could take. I think a lot of atheists would take this direction with what I've said tonight. But you're missing the point if this applies to you, because this is an opportunity for true authenticity. This is an opportunity for true meaning. Yes, life is inherently meaningless unless you're pursuing authenticity, which in this context, for all intents and purposes, is what Christians are attempting to pursue with salvation. Unfortunately, they have adopted delusion and they no longer pursue authenticity with it. They pursue an idol. They've got a little Jesus, buddy Jesus with his thumbs up, smiling at them. That's what they want. They don't want the crucified eternal Lord that they can consume. Just like the Jews getting all upset with Jesus when he started talking about, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, there can be no life in you. They didn't like that because that violated their paradigm.
You also mentioned the shrines, or rather the altars that the Israelites had that had no image. It was the shrine to the unknown God.
Emptiness.
And of course and that shrine to the unknown God is repeated in the New Testament when St. Paul goes to the Areopagus, to the wise.
That's what I was trying to remember. Yes. Thank you. I'm so sorry, everybody. I wanted more time to talk about this, and I think we need maybe a part 2, or what we can do is if you have more questions that we didn't get to tonight, contact Brandon Milam on the Nicolan Network, okay? Just at his name on the Nicolan Network. It works just like Twitter or Facebook. If you put an @ symbol before a person's name, it gets their attention. And ask your question, and we can make that part of the ether next week. Next week, we got Regan Forston to talk about the afterlife. So that should be a very interesting continuation to what we've discussed here tonight. But I think we need to have more conversation about this. There is going to be an Open Lines, Open Topics coming up, maybe 2 of them this season, so we can get back to some of this. I think it's really important, and this was just not enough time.
We need another 3 hours.
I think
Regan was my experience with Regan was one of the things I was thinking about when you were describing these things.
Well, we can maybe talk about it with him. I think he's open enough that he can maybe accept this without becoming offended by it, because I'm not really trying to offend anybody. I think it's really just about trying to come up with a better model for understanding what's really going on.
Right.
Anyway, everyone, Father Chris, Brandon, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Jamie,
everybody.
thank you for being here. Yeah. We'll be back next week with Regan Forston, Tuesday at 8 p.m. We hope to see you then. We'll talk about the afterlife. But until then, I'll see you out there in the ether. Goodbye, and God bless everyone. Good night.
Good night.